What the hell? Okay, so it looks like I am going on Twitch and still sending. Looks like I am now going on YouTube. I'll believe it when I see it. Alright, so I guess I was talking to. Well, in any case, I'm talking to nobody, but I was talking. I wasn't even being broadcast a moment ago. So, hello, my fellow risers. I'm time blind and have ADHD, and so, no, I did that in the wrong order. I think we're going to start reading in about 15 minutes, but also I am time blind and have ADHD, so who knows? Here we go. I see it. Excellent. Keep it up, bruh. Okay, so two things that I want to do. First thing I want to do, um, is look at my year in review with ChatGPT. And then the next thing that I want to do is talk about some stuff. Oh no, I just closed it. Is talk about some stuff um, about duality. I'm very, very excited about this chapter. I wonder why. Whatever. Okay. Okay. Let's do the year in review first. Very excited about this duality chapter. Okay, let's do the year in review. Let's begin. You build bridges from thought into play, turning mind into models each day. From Paris to pixels, your theories took flight. Your calm met your storm in both reason and light. You make sense of the soul in your way. That is so fun. I'm not recording. We're going to read that again. That's frozen. Hello, Rebecca. Oh, I don't have the chat up. Hey, Rebecca. You excited about duality? The hell, bro? Okay, great. That's going. All right, everybody's good. Anyway, so that's so fun. I'm not recording. Start recording. Let's go again. So, ChatGPT year in review. You built bridges from thought into play, turning mind into models each day. From Paris to pixels, your theories took flight. From your calm met your storm in both reason and light. You make sense of the soul in your way. Three big themes of 2025: clarifying how minds work. You deepened your lifelong exploration of cognition, refining it theory, critiquing System 1 2, and building bridges from neuroscience to everyday self understanding. You were creating, filming, and sharing. You built streaming and interview setups, refined multi-camera editing, and moved toward publishing thoughtful brain and society content for YouTube and beyond. Growth in relationships and self. You work to communicate with more patience and awareness, co-designing growth routines with Sarah, and translating reflection into daily compassionate habits. Your 2025 chat stats: 62 total chats. First 10% of users, that's kind of cool. 16 images generated. Top 10% messages sent. I'm a big time user. M dashes. What's that? I don't know. My chattiest day was December 20th. Okay. And I sent 3,412 messages. What's M dashes? Okay. M dashes exchanged. I don't know what that means. Who knows what that means? Okay, so hear me out. That's actually kind of poetic. Let's unpack that a bit. My brain just did a backflip. Is that weirdly profound or just weird? Is this me talking like this? I definitely never said, is that weirdly profound? Maybe. Your chat style. You speak with introspective. Oh, that's weird. That's cool. You speak with introspective precision and curiosity, blending analysis, humor, and emotional intelligence to explore ideas deeply yet conversationally. She is slobbering all over me. If 2025 gave out awards, you'd get most likely to start a revolution with a whiteboard for turning every chat, car ride, and coffee into a think tank on brains, bias, and why everyone else isn't freaking out yet. That's the most accurate thing she said so far. What did I just do? Oh, okay. I don't know if I'm the most likely to start a revolution with a whiteboard, but I do like to hear that. That does match my self image a bit, a lot. But I just really like that line. Oh, let me not forget to export these images. Okay. I'm the strategist. That's my archetype. 3.6% of users share this archetype. So curious what the oh, I s- Oh, so these are just aspects of the strategist. Okay, explorer, planner, conceptual. I'm not practical, but I guess I tried to convince her I was. Thinks big picture across domains, uses ChatGPT to evaluate trade offs, synthesize information, and guide direction. So exciting. I can see the chat, Cloud. Sorry it took me so long to look at the chat, because that's that monitor. So, okay, I'm giving it away. If I look over there, it's to see how many viewers and the chat. But sometimes I might glance at the viewers and not the chat. Viewers just dropped to 2. Um, okay, still life with dashcam and philosophy book. That's the caption. Your year painted in pixels. That's me with my MacBook, my GoPro, and the GoPro is filming, so it's like acting as a dash cam. Ooh, my language, philosophy, and neuroscience. This is cool as hell, bro. A pixel tableau of restless intellect. A GoPro hums beside an open neuroscience text, espresso cooling near a glowing MacBook, and a scribbled Alaris card. Where's the scribbled Alaris card? Maybe there's some discussion about certain symbols and Alaris. I don't know. What does 2026 hold for you? Wipe away the mists of mystery and all will be revealed. Okay. A new idea will come to you while adjusting a tripod or a mic cable. Don't rush past it. That's awesome. That's fine. Um, so if I export this now, it's going to be in the wrong order from the other ones, but whatever. Download, let's say Fortune 1. Save. Let's just do one. No, let's do 2 more, please. Oh no! Alright, let's begin. Ba 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 ba. You're not telling me that it's going to exit out every time I download. When you next rename a file, notice what emotion you're really labeling. That's so funny. The way I name files. Oh no 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 no! I want to see that one again. No, that's okay. A photograph you almost delete will remind you what your eye sees before your mind edits. I never delete photos. Get the fuck out of here. Thanks for chatting this year. Across all the drafts, questions, and rabbit holes, you found a place to work things out, and that's no small thing. Whatever 2026 brings about, we'll chat about it. That is so much fun. All right. Let me just download these so quick. And and then we're gonna get into the book Philosophy of Psychology and Introduction. Um, I mean, I don't know. It's not like you're gonna get like notified or something, are you? Did I do this one? Not yet. Download. Chat stats. Oh, oh, I've been Xing out. Got you, got you, got you. So no more Xing out. Chat style. Love this one. Okay, download. I guess I'll just do a screenshot of that. So fun. Is it gonna be distorted? That's so dumb because it's such a cool thing and then it's all distorted. Skip this. Great. All right, so that's done. Lots of fun. But excellent. All right, let's get into it. Okay, stop recording. I should be recording these, but it's just gonna be so much footage. That's all right. Put it on a separate drive. It's not like I need it for anything. Okay, great. Let's do it. So, Chapter 3, Duality. Oh, I want to say shit first. So, okay, so we've got our we're I think a lot of psychology and philosophy of mind is perverted by our one of our strongest instincts. I mean, it's about up there with run when something is running at you, or go like this if suddenly you realize you're looking at shit, like literal shit. Um, one of our strongest instincts is the belief that we are special, we are distinct from our material, that we are basically angels, capable of pure perception and pure rationality and complete reliable storage and attention and all the illusions of what we call the Warsaw illusions: will, essence, rationality, sense, attention, and storage. So the first chapter was rationality. The second chapter was self-knowledge, which falls under the sense illusion. There's also so that's self-knowledge, and then there's also self-perception, and then there's also exterior, seeing the world as it is. We really think that we can do that. And then this one would be about essence. Um, so it's going to sound like a contradiction because the essence myth is that we are this singular, uh, I guess most of the essence illusion is that we are this singular, coherent, consistent essence, which would refer to then the one of the two things in the duality, right? So the idea of duality, of course, being that we have this physical existence, maybe this physical brain, and then an immaterial mind. And when I talk about an essence, I'm talking about that immaterial mind. And the reason that we feel, well, one of the reasons anyway, that we feel like we need to believe in this immaterial mind is because we think of ourselves as singular, and well, the brain is not singular. Um, it has, many, many constituents. The brain is a set of things. Um, and so, but we don't see ourselves as really a set. We see ourselves as a singular agent. Um, I guess that's not the biggest reason. Definitely a bigger reason would be that we don't see ourselves, that we see ourselves as having capacities that we can't imagine cells, physical material, being capable of. Anyway, so but yeah, so this idea of this singular spirit, this one ghost in the machine, right? It's never an idea of ghosts in the machine, right? Oh, I have sort of this aspect of myself, this aspect of my like, intrinsic self. Um, it's, a ghost in the machine. It's the homunculus, it's the soul. Nobody talks about, oh, we are different, we are, a set of souls. No, no, that's not what the intuition tends to be. Okay, great. Let us get into it. We are at a record 4. Um, so 3.1 introduction. So I will be talking quite a bit during this, by the way, because um, I've got 2 papers that I want to write about this. I'm reading this per the suggestion of UIC philosophy professor Maria Schachtman. No big deal. And we're going to be meeting at the end of the month. And so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and phrase it this way. She wants to hear what I think about this. Probably not the most accurate phrasing, but it's what's best for my ego. Okay, let's do it. 3.1 Introduction. Our discussion so far seems to suggest that the mind is fragmented or divided rather than united. For instance, the fact that many people are vulnerable to reasoning biases, which we discussed in Chapter 1, suggests that their minds are fragmented. Recall the Linda experiment, where most research participants considered the conjunction Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement to be more probable than Linda is a bank teller, because the description of Linda matched that of a feminist. Participants committed the conjunction fallacy because they chose the option that they felt was more representative of Linda. Stephen Jay Gould describes his own experience with the Linda experiment as follows. I know that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is least probable, yet a little homunculus in my head continues to jump up and down, shouting at me, but she can't just be a bank teller. Read the description. Now, here, by the way, so I talked about it is like a singular homunculus that we are. That's when we're talking about the homunculus being the conscious self. Here, he is not. He is talking about him as the possessor of the head, the arena in which there may be many homunculi, and one of them, this nagging instinct, is like, come on, the conjunction is more probable than the singular thing because or whatever. She has to be a feminist. It'd be really interesting if he like says that the he's gonna talk about reason and emotion, that duality. Um, So the minds definitely are fragmented, right? Um, so I'm not a dualist. I'm a monist, but of course there is no singular thing. But it's singular as in it's the brain, but then the brain is a set of things, of fragments. So I hope that doesn't get confusing. Gold says that he knows that the feminist Bank-Teller hypothesis is mathematically less probable than the Bank-Teller hypothesis because a conjunction of two events can never be more probable than one of the conjuncts. But while part of him is convinced that the Bank-Teller hypothesis is more probable, another part of him, still leans toward the feminist Bank-Teller hypothesis. I wonder which one he would identify with. It is as if Gould's mind is, by his own admission, fragmented. The phenomenon of self-observation discussed in Chapter 2 lends support to the idea of the fragmented mind as well. To self-observe is to treat one's own mind as if it is somebody else's. You learn about your own mind by observing and interpreting your own behavior, just like you do when you learn about somebody else's mind by observing and interpreting her behavior. This means that, in a sense, we are strangers to ourselves. This is also the title of Timothy Wilson's 2002 book, which provides an overview of the significance of the studies on the limitations of introspection. The very idea of self-observation suggests that the part of a person's mind that is observing and interpreting is distinct from, and maybe even alienated from, the part of the mind that is being observed and interpreted. As we mentioned in Chapter 2, the most extreme example of this fragmentation or alienation is in the context of confabulation by split brain patients, where the brain is literally divided into two, i.e., the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere become physiologically alienated from one another. But the idea of a fragmented mind can be generalized to other, less extreme forms of self-observation too. According to Wilson, human agents are alienated from an important part of themselves, their adaptive unconscious. Many human judgments, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are produced by the adaptive unconscious. Because people do not have conscious access to the adaptive unconscious, their conscious selves confabulate reasons for why they responded the way they did, says Wilson in 2002 on page 105 in his book. We believe, or he might have several, strangers to ourselves. We believe that the idea of a fragmented mind is plausible, as it makes sense because of some phenomena we've already described and other phenomena we will describe in the following chapters. This chapter will clarify the idea of a fragmented mind in light of the empirical evidence and various theoretical considerations. In particular, this chapter will address the literature on the dual process theory, section 3.2, which is an informative account of mental fragmentation. The dual process theory states that human cognition is the result of the interaction between two kinds of processes, type 1 processes and type 2 processes. And so in it theory, if then, I call those one-its and two-its. One-it spelled W-O-N-I-T and two-its T-U-I-T. What's up, bro? You want to go outside? You want to go outside? All right, let me finish this section, all right? And then both of you can go out. And I think that they exist on a spectrum. And also that all of these processes can be thought of as a condition consequent pairing, if then. For instance, halo effect. if person is smart, if person is attractive and no other information is available, then person is smart, or then classify person as smart or something like that. Okay, this theory provides us with a plausible solution for the so-called rationality paradox, which concerns how to reconcile uh, which concerns how to reconcile human apparent rationality with human apparent irrationality. Not apparent, the rationality part. There are, however, some issues with the dual process theory. The following questions arise. What are type 1, type 2 processes? What distinguishes type 1 processes from type 2 processes? So I'm looking forward to his answer. My answer is availability. So type 1 processes are just always like ready to go, always taking in the inputs, but in different conditions, in rarer conditions, are the type 2 processes processing. So they have more specific conditions, but then they also take in more input. And there's more recursion involved, so the output becomes the input to another process and kind of gets bounced around. And for the type 2 ones, that's what I think. And how do type 1 and type 2 processes interact? Do they compete with each other all the time? Probably not. Or are type 1, type 2 processes, or are type 1 or type 2 processes dominant most of the time? Type 1 processes are dominant most of the time, and in most brains, well, even including mine and me, type 2 processes he'll talk about mostly are just there to like justify and rationalize. But that's the whole point of this channel. I hope that the more that brains know about themselves, the more that type 2 processes are informed about the unreliability of type 1 processes, the less eager that they're going to be, the less automatically they will justify. All right, one last paragraph and then collar and we'll go outside. Or I'll let you outside. Okay, this chapter also addresses whether the dual process theory implies the dual system theory, i.e., type 1 slash type 2 processes correspond to two distinct cognitive systems, section 3.4, and the dual state theory, i.e., type 1, fuck off. Type 1 slash type 2 processes correspond to two distinct mental states or attitudes. Yeah, sure. Um, Let me let him out and make a couple of notes and then we'll keep going. All right, Neo. No, no, no. I gotta go bring him back in. He's just gonna be barking apparently. so I'm thinking about let me pull up the camera. Uh, I guess there's no room really to put it on here, so never mind. Okay, so section 3.2, the dual process theory. Here are the basic ideas. What does it mean to say that the mind is fragmented or divided rather than united? By fragmented, we do not just mean that the mind has many parts, constituents, or systems. The crucial part of is that it's not integrated. That's my word for entirely integrated. That's what I think he's going to say. The crucial part of what we call fragmentation is the idea that different parts of the mind can pull us in different directions, or more specifically, that there can be some kind of conflict between different parts of the mind. Okay, not what I thought, but great. Yeah. Yeah. And so this chapter is, like I said, about the essence illusion. This is amazing. This is awesome because I'm really looking forward to being able to tell Dr. Schachtman I loved this book, and one reason is because it agreed, because we agree. Um, Specifically, that I came up with six sort of categories of illusions, or six illusions um, that minds have about minds. And so far, each of the first three chapters are dedicated to three of the illusions. So that's awesome. Um, and there's probably going to be a perception chapter, so there's going to be two chapters dedicated to the sense illusion. And we've got the will illusion, great. Okay, does not do perception, so this book will have covered the will, sense, rationality, and essence illusions. That is awesome. Um, so put essence. Great. Okay, so conflict. Plato's doctrine of the tripartite structure of the soul is a classic expression of a fragmented mind. According to Plato, no, no, that's definitely a German Shepherd bark. He was already at the door, head down like this. Like that was my bad, bro. I know what I did wrong. My bad. So, all right. So, according to Plato, the soul is composed of three parts: appetite, spirit, and reason. Crucially, Plato does not only say that the soul is divided into parts, he also says that different parts can be in conflict with one another, pulling the soul in different directions. Plato explains this idea in the famous chariot allegory. Let's do a French accent. Remember how we divided each soul in three. Remember how we divided each soul in three at the beginning of our story? Okay, you're not going to be able to understand. Remember how we divided each soul in three at the beginning of our story? Two parts in the form of horses, and the third in that of a charioteer? The horse that is on the right, or nobler side, is upright in frame and well jointed, with a high neck and a regal nose. His coat is white, his eyes are black, and he is a lover of honor, with modesty and self control. Companion to true glory, he needs no whip, and is guided by verbal commands alone. The other horse is a crooked, great jumble of limbs with a short bull neck, a pug nose, black skin, and bloodshot white eyes. Companion to wild boasts and indecency, he is shaggy around the ears, deaf as a post, and just barely yields to horsewhip and goad combined. The idea, I'm a little bit jealous. Like I'm gonna do months right. All I do is write, and I'll be streaming, but all I do is write. I've spent a good deal of time already on just like studying, thinking, conceiving, um, factual or metaphors for facts. But I want to, you know, do like literature metaphors, fiction. All right, the idea of a fragmented mind has been expressed in many ways by different authors in philosophy and psychology. See Frankish and Evans, 2009. And several accounts describe a sort of duality in the human mind. See box A for 3 versions of duality. So we're going to do that right now. Box 3A, theories of duality in human cognition. So there's dual process, dual system, and dual attitude or dual state. Dual process. Dual process theories hold that there are 2 distinct processing modes available for many cognitive tasks. One, type 1, that is fast, automatic, and non-conscious, and another, type 2, that is slow, controlled, and conscious. What fucking Frankish is this? This isn't Keith Frankish. Keith Frankish would have the same objection to this as I do. That there are no controlled or conscious processes. There are processes of which we are conscious, and then as far as controlled, but they're not like conscious, but those can be type 1 or type 2. It is a false pairing to put like rationality and consciousness together. And you know what I hate about it? Because I was just thinking the other day, sometimes I'll get angry. And when I'm angry, there may be a part of me that sort of goes, hey, we shouldn't be getting angry, whatever. That part doesn't feel like me. The conscious self is the one that's like in that primitive state. Because sometimes people will think of like type, anyway. And then controlled, no. First of all, there isn't a controller, so we have to think of controlled as instead meaning um, affected by certain values or by values, and objectives and stuff. Well, that's going to be a spectrum. You're going to have some processes affected by a few of those values, some processes affected by many of those and those values. So this is what I'm talking about. This is why I want to write a paper sort of showcasing, I gotta find an advisor, someone to, tell me if this makes any sense or not, if it's well found, justified, accurate, whatever. Like just so much of our work in psychology and philosophy is just perverted by the researcher, the analyzer's commitment to their intuition that there is a singular, deliberate, conscious agent. Rational. All right, anyway, Now, for the dual system, human cognition is composed of two multi-purpose reasoning systems, widely known as System 1 and System 2. The former supporting Type 1 processes, the latter supporting Type 2 ones. Okay. Oh, Frankish wasn't asserting that. My bad. That was silly. Because this is also a Frankish quote. He's just describing them. Okay. But then it's not Frankish who, so Frankish didn't describe this other one. All right. Dual attitude or dual state. Dual attitudes are defined as different evaluations of the same attitude object: an automatic, implicit attitude, and an explicit attitude. And that's the other thing that bothers me, is that it's all automatic, because, and nobody ever defines automatic in these books when they're talking about, oh, we're not done. When they're talking about these automatic versus deliberate or controlled processes. So they're just relying on our intuitive sense, but our intuitive sense is wrong. Our intuitive sense is that there are like cellular automatic mindless processes, and then there is a mind within the mind that is deliberate and has control, and you know, I hate it. So I'm not taking enough notes. Automatic, automatic, automatic. No one defines automatic. Reader's sense of auto versus not auto is not appropriate for this. We're talking about what is going on in the mind of the driver. You can't then just go and put another driver in there and say, oh, I don't really know. Yeah, there's just like a driver like deciding like what's happening, and then there's the engine. All that shit's automatic, but then there's the driver making decisions. Who talked about this really well? Ramachandran did in A Brief Tour of Human Consciousness. Should we do that just really quickly? It's a short book, so I think we can find it kind of quickly. About how it doesn't help us. It doesn't get us any farther. So it's definitely in this chapter. No, you know what? I probably won't. All right. I'm probably not gonna be able to find it. But what I will tell you, I will read this though. I agree wholeheartedly with what Thomas Henry Huxley said in the 19th century. Contrary to the views of Bishop Wilberforce and Benjamin Disraeli, we are not angels, we are merely sophisticated apes. Yet we don't feel like that. We feel like angels trapped inside the bodies of beasts, forever craving transcendence, trying to spread our wings and fly out. Really a very odd predicament to be in if you think about it. I wonder, no, as the sense of free will, blah blah. Okay, I am gonna just try one thing to try to find it, because he put it really well. Gosh, I thought it's not even in the, not even in the index. I was gonna look for the word homunculus. Anyway, whatever, you get it. The point is that when you say, how does the mind work? Okay, well, there are all these automatic processes, and then there's also like a conscious self within there. Okay, well, then I'm going to ask you, all right, well, how does that conscious controlling self, how does that thing function? Oh, then you zoom in. Well, I guess there's like a maybe like there's this process and that process, and now that I've named them, I guess those probably just happen automatically. And then there's like a controlling like a conscious self. Okay, and how does that thing work, you know? Because every time you describe or name or like specify, delineate a process, it loses the magic that the concept of the conscious self needs. Does that make sense? I think that, yeah. And that's why in thinking fast and slow, Kahneman doesn't talk about thinking slow. He only talks about thinking fast. All these mechanisms, these processes. Okay, let me write this down. As though once mechanisms are delineated, magic the magic required for concept of conscious, controlled, non-automatic, etc. self is lost. Etc. self is lost. Okay. All right. So we've gone through the theory, the three types of theory: dual process, dual system, dual attitude. Um, so dual processes that, yeah, but there's a type 1 process and a type 2 process. Every process is either type 1 or type 2. Dual system, well, that there's that, but also that there's a system that does type 1 processes and a system that does type 2 processes. And then dual attitudes are defined as different evaluations of the same attitude object, and automatic implicit attitude and an explicit attitude. I think that's basically meaningless, but we'll see. Okay. So currently, the best expression of the idea of mental fragmentation can be found in the dual process theory. The dual process theory has been applied to different domains, including reasoning, learning, and social cognition. There are also dual process theories of other psychological phenomena, such as moral judgments, Chapter 4, or mind reading, we'll see in Chapter 6. The focus of this chapter is the dual process theory of reasoning, according to which reasoning performance is determined by the interaction between two reasoning processes of different kinds, type 1 processes and type 2 processes. So this isn't going to be about essence at all, about an immaterial soul at all? Okay, I see. Put a question mark there by whether this is going to be about the essence illusion. Typically, type 1 processes are evolutionarily older, unconscious, automatic, low effort, and associative, whereas type 2 processes are evolutionarily more recent, are conscious, controlled, high effort, and rule based. That's crazy. Because rule based, I think, should definitely apply. I mean, it should definitely also apply to system 1. Because there's like less structure, there's less. It's more of anything goes with system 1. I guess that's maybe what he means. Just like the two horses in Plato's chariot allegory, type 1 processes and type 2 processes can pull us in different directions. In the Linda experiment, for example, type 2, all right, because I can't sit up that straight. In okay, so just like the two horses in Plato's chariot allegory, type 1 processes and type 2 processes can pull us in different directions. In the Linda experiment, for example, type 2 processes should follow the mathematically canonical procedure and reach the conclusion that the bank-teller hypothesis is more probable than the feminist bank-teller hypothesis. So what's the mathematically canonical procedure? Like the mathematical canon is that a conjunct can't be less likely than the conjunction. But why would we have evolved with that? I don't know. Interesting. Okay. Um, so, in the Linda experiment, for example, type 2 processes should follow the mathematically canonical procedure and reach the conclusion that the bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the feminist bank teller hypothesis. I know that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is least probable. This barking is killing me. All right, I'm going to bring the dogs in. And then I'm going to try to really buckle down. How many pages is this? Looks like it's not even. All right, 23 pages left. All right, come on in, boy. All right, let me pee real quick. All right. So, in the Linda experiment, processes can pull us in different. For in the Linda experiment, for example, type 2 processes should follow the mathematically canonical procedure and reach the conclusion that the bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the feminist bank teller hypothesis. I know that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is least probable. In contrast, type 1 processes follow a heuristic procedure driven by judgments of representativeness and reach the conclusion that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the bank teller hypothesis. A little homunculus in my head continues to jump up and down, shouting at me, "But she can't just be a bank teller. Read the description." Gold, 1991. We will now discuss two issues concerning the dual process theory. In the rest of this section, we focus on the reasons for accepting the dual process theory. Next, in section 3.3, we focus on the details of the theory. Okay, empirical reasons, reasoning biases. There are both empirical and philosophical reasons for favoring the dual process theory, or at least supporting the basic idea of it. We will start with the empirical reasons and then turn to the philosophical reasons. A clarification is needed with regard to the empirical reasons for favoring the dual process theory. It wouldn't be accurate to assume that the dual process theory is an empirical theory in psychology that is directly testable via experiments. Instead, it is one of general hypotheses in psychology that can make sense of a series of relevant studies as interconnected, just like the massive modularity hypothesis, the language of thought hypothesis, and the adaptive unconsciousness hypothesis. In fact, Jonathan Evans and Keith Stanovich argue that the dual process theory is a broad framework or meta theory. It cannot be falsified by the failure of any specific instantiation or experimental finding. And its central, it cannot be falsified by the failure of any specific instantiation or experimental finding. And its central role is to stimulate new research and accumulate enough supportive evidence. That's what Evans and Stanovich said, well, you could tell from the voice in 2013. The dual process theory has been successful in making sense of relevant empirical studies as interconnected. In Thinking Fast and Slow, for example, Daniel Kahneman in 2011 interprets the entire heuristics and biases program in light of the dual process theory. So let's talk about the Wasson selection task again. Having said that, the dual process theory has been associated with some particular empirical findings. For example, with some particular empirical findings. For example, the dual process theory of reasoning was originally introduced in an interpretation of the Wasson selection task experiments, which we saw in Chapter 1. In one experiment, Wasson and Evans, 1974, participants were asked to select cards that need to be turned over to verify the given hypothesis and to explain the reason for selecting the cards. Participants' actual choices were strongly influenced by a primitive matching bias, selecting cards depicting the items that are explicitly mentioned in the hypothesis. But the reasons offered by participants have little to do with their matching bias. Rather, their reasons were apparently logical post hoc rationalizations. This reminds us of the Stockings experiment by Nisbet and Wilson in 1977, discussed in Chapter 2, where participants' choices were strongly influenced by the position effect of which they were not aware. When asked to justify their choice, they offered a post hoc rationalization that had nothing to do with the position effect. For identical pairs of stockings, hey, which one do you prefer? 40% of people choose the one that was most on the right. Stocking D, even though they were identical. And then the Wasson selection task. Show you that real quick. So let's say I say that let's say that's one. Seems like there's two couple combined here, no? Okay. Let's see, how can I do this? So, okay, well, you see these cards. No. How am I gonna be able to do this? So, I'm not gonna be able to do this easily with these. No, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do this with these. But so we're bad at the Wasson selection task when it's like abstract. Like there's a rule about numbers and colors. So if there's a 4 on one side, then there's brown on the other side. In which case, maybe I can do it. In which case, if you were presented with these two cards, in order to check the rule, actually, no, this is perfect. So if let's say you were told that if there's a 4 on one side, then it is brown on the other side. And now, what do you need to flip over to check the rule? Maybe you said that you need to flip them both over. Incorrect, I'm pretty sure. In order to find out that the rule is wrong, you would have to deny the consequent. What the fuck? What? You might think, oh, well, I want to check this one to see if there's a 4 and this one to see if it's brown. But actually, even if this isn't 4, doesn't make the rule wrong. And so the heuristic is it's like, oh, I heard 4 and brown, so I'm going to check those. Oh, okay, well. Oh, and then, what's interesting is confirmation bias. Let's say that you did this task with someone and they said, oh, I think I need to flip over the 4 and the brown one. So already you've shown one heuristic, don't know what it would be called. And then let's say you say, okay, go ahead and do it. And let's say, let's say you say, okay, now do it one at a time. And they flip over this and they go, oh, well, there you go. I've confirmed it. But didn't they think that they had to flip over this one because didn't they think that if this was a different number, then that it doesn't, but then that would disprove the rule? But isn't that interesting that they stopped? They didn't flip this one over. Of course, these are just the people in my imagination. But that would be a really cool experiment. But I'm not going to take the time to write that down now. Anyway, so we're just bad at figuring out what we have to flip to check the rule, unless the rule is something that we're like used that's going to enlist our social like fairness mechanisms, our sort of society rule mechanisms. So if it's like, trying to find a cheater or someone breaking a rule. So, for instance, so you have cards that have either ages or beverages on them. And the rule is only people over 21 and over are allowed to drink alcohol. So which ones do you need to check? Well, you don't need to check the orange juice. You need to check all the ones that have either an alcoholic beverage on them or an age under 21. And all of a sudden people know how to, like, which one exactly the right ones to flip over. They're not flipping over 25 because, well, whatever a 25-year-old is drinking has nothing to do with the rule. Okay, great. So participants actually, blah, blah, blah. So this reminds us of the stocking, blah, blah. Okay, so to explain the result of the Watson selection task experiments, Watson and Evans propose a dual process account. By the way, I have no idea how to pronounce Watson. Wason? I don't know. Wasson? I don't think so. To explain the results of the Watson selection task experiments, Watson and Evans propose a dual process account, which posits two distinct processes. One, the processes underlying reasoning performance, e.g., matching bias, are not generally available for introspection. Two, introspective accounts of reasoning performance reflect one's tendency to construct a justification for one's own behavior consistent with one's knowledge of the situation. Belief bias. The dual process theory of reasoning has been associated with the belief bias, which is the tendency of one's beliefs to influence one's judgment of logical validity, such that inferences with believable, i.e., plausible given one's background beliefs, conclusions are more likely to be regarded as valid than ones with unbelievable conclusions. I'm going to read that again. The dual process theory of reasoning has been associated with the belief bias, which is the tendency of one's beliefs to influence one's judgment of logical validity. So it sounds a bit like confirmation bias, right? Such that, but not the same, I think, such that inferences with believable conclusions, So believable meaning that it matches the current belief, right? So such that inferences with believable conclusions are more likely to be regarded as valid than those with unbelievable conclusions. So I could do a valid inference. So um, I could say to you that if all men are gods, then um, that bum over there is a god. And you might, and then and I establish, so I say, all men are gods. Um, that bum over there is a man. Therefore, okay, so let me redo that. All men are gods. That bum over there is a man. That bum over there is a god. That's a completely valid inference from the premises. But that's hard work looking at actual inferences. The easier thing to do is just, does that conclusion match my belief? And remember that one thing about the mind is energy efficiency. And about evolution. An inference is logically valid if its conclusion is guaranteed to be true when all of its premises are true. In an experiment on logical validity, participants were asked to evaluate 4 types of inferences: valid believable, valid unbelievable, invalid believable, invalid unbelievable. So, valid believable, a valid inference with a believable conclusion. For example, no cigarettes are inexpensive. Some addictive cigarettes are inexpensive. Therefore, some addictive things are not cigarettes. Okay, got it. I see my mistake. Let's do it again. Valid, believable. A valid inference with a believable conclusion. For example, no cigarettes are inexpensive. Some addictive things are inexpensive. Therefore, some addictive things are not cigarettes. Now, valid, unbelievable. A valid inference with an unbelievable conclusion. For example, no addictive things are inexpensive. Some cigarettes are inexpensive. Therefore, some cigarettes are not addictive. Now, invalid, believable. An invalid inference with a believable conclusion. For example, no addictive things are inexpensive. Some cigarettes are inexpensive. Therefore, some addictive things are not cigarettes. And so you're like, yeah, some addictive things are not cigarettes. Okay, great. But the question was that a valid inference? And it was not. Invalid, unbelievable. An invalid inference with an unbelievable conclusion. For example, no cigarettes are inexpensive. Some addictive things are inexpensive. Therefore, some cigarettes are not addictive. The results showed, and immediately, you know what I just did right there? I was like, oh, well, cigarettes without tobacco in them would be non addictive and would be less expensive because there isn't the tobacco in them. I was eager. Well, that's an unbelievable conclusion. So I guess maybe that just popped in my head as a joke. I don't know. I mean, I don't think anything ever pops into our heads as a joke. I think whatever mechanism said it, believes it, or whatever that means. Or I guess just doesn't disbelieve it. The results showed a significant belief bias. Inferences with believable conclusions are more likely to be regarded as valid than those with unbelievable conclusions. 92% of participants took valid, believable inferences to be valid, while only 46% took valid, unbelievable inferences to be valid. Wow, exactly half. So all those inferences were valid, but the believable ones, 92% of participants were like, yep, that's valid, bro. The unbelievable ones, which were valid, Only half of that amount were like, yep, that's valid, bro. But there's also another tendency. Valid inferences are more likely to be regarded as valid than invalid ones. Okay, great. So we're not completely useless. Some We are more likely to call valid inferences valid than invalid ones. Oh, right. What? Okay, so we had the 92 and the 46, but there's also another tendency. Valid inferences are more likely to be regarded as valid than invalid ones. 46% of participants took valid, unbelievable inferences to be valid, while only 8% took invalid, unbelievable inferences to be valid. Okay, I see. So even when it's unbelievable, we don't actually stop there. So that's not the only mechanism that runs. Oh, does this match my beliefs? There is also a mechanism which has less weight. Well, no, it still has quite a bit of weight. Um, that looks at the actual validity. Okay, cool. Cool. So that's really cool because yeah, so oh, okay, he's going to talk about it now. Okay, Evans and colleagues interpret these results in terms of the dual process theoretical idea that these two tendencies reflect an interplay between two kinds of processes: a non logical process, responsible for the belief bias, and a logical process, responsible for sensitivity to logical structure. All right, philosophical reasons, the rationality paradox. We will now move on to philosophical reasons for favoring the dual process theory. The main theoretical consideration concerns what is known as the rationality paradox, which can be summarized as a simple question. We can put a man on the moon, so why can't we solve these logical reasoning problems? O'Brien, 1998. As we have seen, human agents deviate from the rational norms of reasoning. I hate when they even use the word deviate. As though, we were there and then we went like that. As we have seen human agents deviate from the rational norms of reasoning. For example, people systematically judged that it was more probable that Linda was a feminist bank teller than a bank teller. But this is paradoxical. If people are so irrational that they make frequent mistakes in basic reasoning problems, like in the Linda experiment, then how did humans achieve remarkable things in science, technology, culture, and other areas? I don't see how reasoning, like, reliably is the only way to get there. Can't I mean, you put a bunch of broken clocks. I don't know what I'm gonna say there. I don't know how I'm gonna finish that. If people are so irrational that they blah blah blah, how can creatures who systematically fail to solve the Linda problem and other basic problems of reasoning solve the much more difficult and complicated logical and mathematical problems that are required, for example, in the project of sending humans to the moon and bringing them back to Earth safely? Note that the answer to this problem cannot just be about individual differences. For example, the answer cannot just be that NASA's employees are super smart or especially immune to biases and errors. The real paradox is that one and the same person can be rational in some contexts and irrational in other contexts. For example, a science professor who can easily solve complicated math problems might fail in the Linda experiment. Not if he was looking at it as a math problem, because then he'd be system twoing it if he was using pen and paper and he was thinking that it was not an intuitive thing, that it was a hard thing. Different mechanisms would be activated, right? One of the conditions for type 2 processes is to kind of know that the problem is hard or important. A special case of the rationality paradox concerns the fact that the remarkable achievements by humans Our special case of the rationality paradox concerns the fact that the remarkable achievements by humans include scientific achievements, which, in turn, include psychological achievements, such as the findings of human reasoning errors in the heuristics and biases program. That's what someone said to me. I was talking about this yesterday. He said, but since we found these errors, doesn't that prove that we're rational? But how can creatures who systematically fail in the Linda experiment and other problems of basic reasoning, other basic problems of reasoning successfully solve logical and mathematical tasks that are required for designing and conducting successful psychological studies on reasoning and reveal reasoning errors such as the conjunction fallacy? This version of the rationality paradox can be put in the form of a self-defeating paradox, which we call the self-defeating rationality paradox. Suppose that the empirical evidence supports the skeptical view that humans systematically make errors in some basic reasoning problems, such as the Linda problem. However, an implication of this is that humans are not really capable of doing psychology. After all, doing psychology requires the cognitive capacity for solving logical and mathematical tasks that are much more difficult than those required in the Linda experiment. This is such a false paradox. And which is what he's going to say, because we have different mechanisms. Some mechanisms can't do that shit. And those are the ones running in the Linda problem. But if humans are not capable of doing psychology, then we should not trust the findings of psychology, including those about reasoning biases. This means that we lose the empirical evidence for the skeptical view of reasoning. The skeptical view defeats itself. It does not. The self-defeating rationality paradox. Here are the propositions. So, premise 1. The experimental psychology of reasoning reveals that human reasoning capacity is not sufficiently reliable. Premise 2. If human reasoning capacity is not sufficiently reliable, then we should not trust the product of human reasoning capacity, including scientific findings and theories, and in turn, the experimental psychology of reasoning. Conclusion. Thus, the experimental psychology of reasoning is self-defeating. So, I mean, the biggest problem is, premise 1. The rationality paradox and its special case, the self-defeating rationality paradox, seems to suggest that, on the one hand, humans systematically fail to solve even basic reasoning tasks in some contexts, such as in the heuristics and biases experiments. And so, on the other hand, they systematically succeed in solving difficult ones in other contexts, such as when calculating the orbit of a space rocket or analyzing experimental data in a psychological study. The dual process theory helps us to make sense of this rather puzzling situation. According to the dual process theory, human cognitive performance is determined by the complex interplay between type 1 and type 2 processes. Type 1 processes are dominant in some contexts, while type 2 processes are dominant in other contexts. Systematic reasoning failures are typically seen in type 1 dominant contexts, while systematic reasoning successes are typically seen in type 2 dominant contexts. Parenthetical paragraph. However, we should be skeptical about the simplistic idea that people always make mistakes in type 1 dominant contexts, or people do not make any mistakes in type 2 dominant contexts. For instance, people might appeal to heuristic processes in type 1 dominant contexts, but heuristics work perfectly fine in many cases. In general, those heuristics are quite useful, says Tversky and Kahneman in 1974 on page 1124. I'm guessing it's the book Heuristics and Biases, because I think that was written in the 70s. No, I thought it was written in the 90s. I don't know. With the dual process theory, we can also respond. Oh, that's probably some paper, not even a book. I don't know. With the dual process theory, we can also respond to the self-defeating rationality paradox. Premise 1 can be true only when it is understood as a claim about type 1 dominant contexts. Thus, the argument should look like this. Premise 1. The experimental psychology of reasoning reveals that human reasoning capacity in type 1 dominant contexts is not sufficiently reliable. Premise 2. If human reasoning capacity in type 1 dominant context is not sufficiently reliable, then we should not trust the product of human reasoning capacity, including scientific findings and theories, and in turn, the experimental psychology of reasoning. Conclusion, thus, the experimental psychology of reasoning is self-defeating. Why wouldn't you just in there in premise two? Okay, anyway, but now we see what's wrong with this argument. In particular, premise two is false because even if human reasoning capacity in type 1 dominant contexts is not sufficiently reliable, human reasoning capacity in type 2 dominant contexts might be sufficiently reliable, in which case we might trust the product of human reasoning capacity, including scientific findings and theories in a type 2 dominant context. Section 3.3, processes and interactions. Type 1 and type 2 processes. Let us now move on to consider the details of the dual process theory. So far, we have not offered a detailed characterization of it. We have only said that reasoning performance is determined by the interaction between type 1 and type 2 processes. There are at least two crucial questions to be asked. 1. Process. What are type 1 processes and type 2 processes? 2. Interaction. How do type 1 processes and type 2 processes interact? Let us begin with the process question. Type 1 processes and type 2 processes are distinguished by their properties. It is assumed that there are two clusters of properties, the cluster of type 1 properties and the cluster of type 2 properties. Type 1 processes instantiate type 1 properties, and type 2 processes instantiate type 2 properties. We should not expect that type 1 type 2 properties in table 1 are always co-instantiated, and that type 1 or type 2 processes are the ones with all of the type 1 or type 2 properties. In fact, dual process theorists are not usually committed to such a strong claim. The main misuse of such tables is to treat them as strong statements about necessarily co-occurring features, in short, to aid in the creation of a straw man. So let's check out this list real quick. Type 1 process, type 1 cluster properties. So type 1 processes tend to be unconscious or preconscious, implicit, low effort, automatic, rapid, high capacity. What does that mean, high capacity? Default process, holistic and perceptual. And also feel free to ask in the chat about one of these. Default process, holistic and perceptual, evolutionarily old, about evolutionary rationality, shared with animals, nonverbal, about modular cognition, associative, domain specific, contextualized, pragmatic, parallel, stereotypical, universal, independent of general intelligence, independent of working memory. For the record, anyway. Type 2 cluster properties. So type 2 processes tend to be conscious, explicit, high effort, controlled, slow, low capacity, inhibitory. Oh, like it can't do much at once, I think. And high capacity, it can, I see. Controlled, slow, low capacity, inhibitory, analytic, and reflective, evolutionarily recent, about individual rationality, uniquely human, verbal, about fluid intelligence, rule-based, domain general, abstract, logical, sequential, egalitarian, heritable, linked to general intelligence, and limited by working memory capacity. Okay, so dual process theorists are not usually committed to such a strong claim, blah, blah. Okay, some propose to distinguish essential and accidental items in the list. Essential properties are what define type 1, type 2 processes, and accidental properties are statistically, but not necessarily correlated with essential properties. Evans and Stanovich argue that essential Evans and Stanovich argue that essential type 1 properties are the property of not requiring working memory, and the property of being autonomous. Essential type 2 properties are the property of requiring working memory and the property of involving cognitive decoupling. Cognitive decoupling, what's that? Is the ability to distinguish supposition from belief and to aid rational choices by running thought experiments. Type 1 properties and type 2 properties form statistically, but not necessarily, correlated property clusters. Type 1 clusters and type 2 clusters. An intriguing suggestion by Richard Samuels in 2009 is that type 1, type 2 clusters constitute natural kinds or homeostatic property clusters. In other words, type 1, type 2 properties are statistically but not necessarily co-instantiated, and this tendency to co-instantiate is not an accident. It is due to underlying mechanisms. So there are these confounds, these reasons, the nature of these processes is why often, but not necessarily, the type 1 process has this type 1 property. Samuels proposes the following analogy. Influenza is associated with its characteristic symptoms such as coughing and fever that tend to be, but are not always, co-instantiated. And any co-instantiation can be explained by an underlying causal mechanism, namely the presence of the flu virus. Similarly, type 1, type 2 properties tend to be, but are not always, co-instantiated, and any co-instantiation can be explained by an underlying causal mechanism. The causal mechanism is system 1, system 2, which will be discussed in section 3.4. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand actually the co-instantiated thing. I want to see the first time you use that word here. Because they're not saying that type 1 and type 2 are co-instantiated. Each time is the slash is that like whether we're talking about type 1 or type 2, right? Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not sure. Let's I'm gonna ask ChatGPT here. Keep forgetting us. Oh, I spelled it right. Um, So it's okay, so it's about like two properties being of a type 1 process. What? No. Then she goes and says type 1 and that this means that type 1 and type 2 properties tend to occur together? No. No. I'm sorry. Yeah, I expected that. Okay. I need to take a minute with this. So if ChatGPT is right, but I don't think it is. Nah, I don't think so. So ChatGPT, because I would agree with this. So ChatGPT says that often a type 1 process and a type 2 process will be occurring in the same instant. And sure, like there's parallel processing, but that's just not an important claim. So she says that MIYAZONO-san is saying, in real humans, type 1 and type 2 processes often show up together in the same tasks or mental episodes, but you can have one without the other. No way Miyazono is saying that. No way. No way. Uh, no way. Oh, and then she says that leaves room for conscious type 1 like processes and then unconscious type 2 like processing and hybrid or intermediate cases, which definitely I agree with. But that is not what he is saying. No way. You got that wrong. There is about a 2% chance that that's what Miyazona is saying. Think it's much more likely that he is saying that a type 1 property and I mustn't be discouraged. This is why I was kind of worried about streaming because now that I'm sort of now that I'm not reading, I had 10 billion people watching. It's just dropped down to 100. But I mustn't let that discourage me. So I think it's much more likely that he is saying that a type 1 property like implicit often co-occurs with the type 1 property, let's say, evolutionarily old. No, let's say independent of general intelligence because of the underlying mechanism, as he says, often, but not necessarily. Let's see what you have to say to that, ChatGPT. Yeah, please think longer. Yep, you're very likely right, and my previous gloss was too close to the type 1 versus type 2 co-occur reading. The phrasing type 1, type 2 properties with the slash is exactly the kind of shorthand authors use to mean the bundle of properties typically associated with type 1 and likewise type 2 with type 1 and likewise type 2, processes tend to cluster together statistically but can come apart. So it's not type 1 and type 2 processes co-occur. It's the properties ascribed to a type are correlated but not guaranteed to all hold at once. Okay, well now we have a problem. If I accept your latest explanation because it's what I was expecting, I'm just confirmation biasing this bitch. So now, tell me what you really think. Okay, here's what she really thinks after checking the wording carefully. Your revised interpretation is much more likely correct than my first one, and not just because it fits your expectations. It fits the slash notation, type 1 slash type 2 processes. This is almost never used to mean type 1 and type 2 processes together. Sorry, I'm an idiot. It is standard shorthand for the sets of processes associated with each type. 2. The role of underlying mechanism, and this is decisive. MIYAZONO is explicitly discussing why certain properties cluster, which only makes sense if he's talking about intra-type clustering, not cross-type, inter-type co-occurrence. All right, very good. Okay, carrying on. Thank you, ChatGPT, for confirming my understanding after having tripped pretty hard by disconfirming my understanding. All right, so now interaction between type 1 and type 2 processes. Let us move to the interaction between type 1 and type 2 processes. One might think that type 1 and type 2 processes operate in a parallel manner and that they compete with one another for the final input. Output. In the Linda experiment, for example, type 1 processes are operating and eventually generate the answer that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the bank teller hypothesis. Type 2 processes are also operating and eventually generate the answer that the bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the feminist bank teller hypothesis. And the final output, the person's answer to the question, is determined as the result of the competition between these two kinds of processes. This model of interaction between type 1 and type 2 processes is known as the parallel competitive model. Excuse me. This model implies that the reasoning mistake in the Linda experiment is due to the weakness of type 2 processes. They were defeated in the competition by type 1 processes. The parallel competitive model states that type 1 and type 2 processes operate in parallel. Alternatively, we might think that type 1 and type 2 processes operate in a sequential manner, i.e., type 2 processes come after type 1 processes. More precisely, we might think that type 1 processes are the default processes and type 2 processes intervene in type 1 processes only when necessary, or only when certain conditions are met. We're not rational enough for it to be that the condition is that, oh, it's necessary, so type 2 comes in. Get out. Then how would we ever see type 1's errors? This model of interaction is known as the default intervention model. Okay. So maybe it's that, maybe it's that. This model implies that participants' reasoning mistakes in the Linda experiment were due to the laziness, as Kahneman says on page 32 in Thinking Fast and Slow, rather than the weakness of type 2 processes. What's the fucking difference? So laziness could be defined as ah, I see the difference. Laziness could be defined as having more restrictive conditions. I'm only getting out of bed if there's a really, really good reason, or if, this whole list of conditions are met. I'm not eager to do this. It's not going to be easy to get me to do this. Whereas weakness is, uh, all right, I'm ready to do this. Why isn't anyone listening to me? Why am I having no effect on the computation? They're both the case. In an artificial neuron or in a real neuron, you have what's called the bias and the weight. The bias is like the threshold that needs to be met. You know, like for instance, let's say my bias is $100. That means I'm not doing jack shit until you give me up to $100. You give me $50, not enough. Didn't meet the bias. Didn't meet the threshold. Didn't satisfy the bias. Okay. Um, and then the weight is the output. So let's say we're talking about $100 for a slap. So first of all, I'm not slapping anybody if I have less than $100. Now, suppose that the bias is satisfied. Okay, and let's say the weight is light. And then, so let's compare me, who has a high bias, low weight, to my friend Greg here, who has a low bias, high weight. Nope, not doing it. Not doing it. Not doing it. Not doing it. Okay, fine. And now here's Greg. Nope, not doing it. Okay, fine. Boom. The default intervention model states that type 2 processes are lazy. Type 1 processes, you're all right, buddy. You're all right. I'm sorry. That was. The default intervention model states that type 2 processes are. Man, I gotta get a camera on you. You would be so good for, to entertain people because so you have mechanisms, or you are composed of mechanisms. In fact, everybody in the world has at least one mechanism that wants to listen to this. Everyone in the world also has a mechanism where they don't want to listen to this, especially when if you scroll, you might see like a 10-second thing that's gonna make you laugh, or that's gonna have lots of colors and make you feel something. That this stuff, although it can make you feel big things, they might be too big, and also it takes time and investment, and also it's not the kind of feelings that those mechanisms that want to scroll are looking for. They're looking for right, buddy? All right, I gotta get a camera on you for sure. Let me make sure I have in my. Okay, yeah. Well, we only have two people on, which is this phone and somebody. Let's see. We'll have Siri remind us. Remind me in 2 hours to add webcam to list. Great. Okay, moving on. All right. The default intervention model states that type 2 processes are lazy, type 1 processes are the default position. So this is the bias. Are the default position, and type 2 processes come into play only when necessary. That said, type 2 processes at least have the capacity to intervene in type 1 processes. But we can think of another model that denies that type 2 processes have this capacity. Type 2 processes are not lazy, they are incompetent. Type 2 processes are not able to intervene in type 1 processes. At best, they can rationalize the output from type 1 processes in a post hoc manner. Or alternatively, because maybe they can't intervene, or it's like very rare that they're able to intervene. But what they can do is run it again. Run it through system 1 again. Wouldn't that be an interesting way to look at system 1 and system 2? That system 2 sort of acts as like a guide for, it just thinks about like error, importance, available time, and stuff like that, and kind of acts as a bit of a maestro for the reasoning processes. And then all reasoning processes are system 1, in which case we would have to separate into like two. So we, okay. All right, hear me out. What if we said, so reasoning happens, there are two types of reasoning processes: type 1 processes and type 2 processes. Type 1 processes, I like the idea that they're sort of constantly taking input and ready to give output, and that they're pretty simple. Type 2 processes uh, need to have the input, quote unquote, sent to them, and are more nuanced. Type 1 processes and type 2 processes both, let's say, let's see whether, let's put this out there as a framework. Type 1 and type 2 processes both belong to what we can call system 1. Now, system 2's job is not to reason, it's to effect, not affect, effect the values, effect values. So, like, this is important. We have a high quantity of time available to us to work on this. So I'm going to enlist some of System 1's Type 2 processes. Is that completely meaningless? Maybe. It's the first time I've ever thought of this. So what if it's like systems? And then we're going to move on as soon as I write this down. Types. I put it above because we tend to think of, the higher cognition. It's a thought. Okay, so blah blah blah. Unlike type 2 processes are similar to lawyers rather than police officers. All right, so we can think of another model that denies, I'm rereading, that type 2 processes have this capacity. We can say type 2 processes are not lazy, they are incompetent. Type 2 processes are not able to intervene in type 1 processes. At best, they can rationalize the output from type 1 processes in a post hoc manner. Type 2 processes are similar to lawyers rather than police officers, as in the former model, the default intervention model. Unlike police officers, lawyers are not able to intervene in a defendant's behavior. Their job is rather to rationalize and justify the defendant's behavior in a post hoc manner. What about maestro? Let us call or dispatch. Um, let us call this the lawyer-client model. Okay, so now we have the parallel competitive model, the default intervention model, and now the lawyer-client model. Okay. Okay. This model implies that participants' reasoning and mistakes in the Linda experiment are due to the incompetence rather than the laziness in the case of the default intervention model, or weakness in the case of the parallel competitive model of type 2 processes. They are not able to intervene in type 1 processes in the first place. Okay, and then what do I want to call mine? Mine will be the, I feel like dispatch. I don't know. Right now I'm going to put dispatch hierarchy because there's a hierarchy within system 1 of system 1 and of type 1 and type 2 processes, and then system two's job is to dispatch, to delegate, no, dispatch, let's say value. So because it's the dispatcher that has the values that then instructs, oh, okay, let's run some type 1, let's run some type 2 for this. Okay, it doesn't follow the same format as lawyer client or default intervention, but nor does parallel competitive. Okay, or the same like conceptual format. Okay, so despite sounding radical, the lawyer client model is plausible to some extent. For example, it is consistent with the selection task experiment discussed in chapters 1 and 3. Participants' performance is largely determined by unconscious type 1 processes which exhibit the primitive matching bias. In contrast, type 2 processes are not vulnerable to such a bias, but they are not capable of intervening in type 1 processes in the first place. Like, when you say consistent, it sounds like it might be consistent with the evidence, but it's just allowed by. It's consistent, like, circumstantially. So let me read that again. So despite sounding radical, the lawyer-client model is plausible to some extent. For example, it is consistent with the selection task experiment discussed in chapters 1 and 3. Participants' performance is largely determined by unconscious type 1 processes, which exhibit the primitive matching bias. Oh, you said this and that. So that's what I'm going to flip over, the cards I'm going to flip over. In contrast, type 2 processes are not vulnerable to such a bias, but they are not capable of intervening in type 1 processes in the first place. Type 2 processes just rationalize the performance of type 1 processes, or the result of, I think is better, in a post hoc manner. Oh, I guess that's what he means. Okay. A similar analysis is applicable to the Stockings experiment discussed in Chapter 2. In this experiment, choice is largely determined by unconscious type 1 processes, which are strongly influenced by the position effect. In contrast, type 2 processes are not vulnerable to such an effect, but they are not capable of intervening in type 1 processes in the first place. Type 2 processes just rationalize the type 1 choice in a post hoc manner. Which model is correct? This is not an easy question to answer, but a conciliatory answer is available. Each model captures some of the interactions between type 1 and type 2 processes. Oh, I said we had 23 pages. That was like 10 pages ago because I actually was wrong. It was 33. Okay. This is, in fact, it is far from obvious that we need to choose only one model and reject the alternatives. The idea is that in many cases, type 2 processes just wait and see, which is consistent with the default intervention model. The idea is that in many cases, type 2 processes just wait and see, which is consistent with the default intervention model. Even when they are operating, their main job is to rationalize what type 1 processes do, which is consistent with the lawyer-client model. That is not their main fucking job. It's only their main job because we're ignorant and we have you ever heard anybody talk about intuition? Ooh, yeah. And then first of all, they've basically done no reading of anything from science. But if they have, it's Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. And they're like, oh yeah, intuition, frequencies. Well, okay, they're not talking about frequencies and Blink in the same sentence, I hope. But um, if you've heard people talk about intuition, they think that their intuition is magical. Well, they are brains. That belief plays a role in system 2 processing. It's even, you could say that beliefs are a system 2 thing, maybe. Especially a belief like that, well, there's definitely a system 1 also belief. But anyway, um, we as humans tend to believe that we can trust our intuition, that it's even like magical. And there's definitely a gender difference here, of course. I shouldn't say of course, but I do think that, but I do oppose many supposed gender differences, but this one seems pretty, well, or maybe women are just prouder of their excitement about their intuition and their faith in their intuition. Except here's the thing, aren't they always saying like, oh no, yeah, I'm really working on listening to my intuition more. I never listen to my intuition enough. I keep like second guessing myself and then getting it wrong. And so from now on, I'm going to listen to my intuition, which I always complain about because that's just such bullshit. They listened to their intuition and it was wrong. They're just pinning the intuition label on some future magical truth knower, truth seer, implicit truth seer. I don't know if I finished my rant, but we're moving on. Okay. But sometimes type 2 processes do intervene, which creates a real competition between type 1 and type 2 processes, which is consistent with the parallel competitive model. We will come back to this issue in the discussion of moral judgment in Chapter 4. Section 3.4, the dual system theory. Exactly two systems? We now turn to more controversial ideas that are often associated with the dual process theory that we saw in box 3A. The first idea, known as the dual system theory, extends the dual process theory by making specific proposals about the underlying cognitive mechanisms responsible for type 1 and 2 processing. Type 1 and type 2 processes are attributed to two distinct cognitive systems with different structures, functions, and evolutionary histories, and thus we have in effect two minds. Gold talks about the internal disagreement within him between a part of him, a little homunculus, who says that Linda can't be the bank, can't be a bank, can't just be a bank teller. Read the description. And another part of him, I, who knows that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is least probable. The dual system theory takes this description rather seriously and interprets it as a disagreement between two distinct systems, System 1 and System 2. Or that's just a narrative that we come up with. I mean, I don't think we should necessarily take, I don't think at all that we should take this as evidence. Not that he is, I just reacting to that. Is the dual system theory to that to not what he did, but to just what I enlivered, how I read what he said. Is the dual system the dual system theory takes this description rather seriously and interprets it as a disagreement between two distinct systems, System 1 and System 2. Is the dual system theory plausible? Should we really attribute type 1 processes and type 2 processes to two distinct systems? It depends on what we mean by systems. Different authors use the term system in different ways. In the early stage of the development of dual process theory, authors did not draw a sharp theoretical distinction between the process talk and the system talk, often going back and forth between them relatively freely, such as Stanovich in 1999. Stanovich, by the way, who came up with type 1 and type 2 processes. This suggests that for these authors, the distinction between the process talk and the system talk is more or less a kind of terminological choice, or perhaps the two are different ways of expressing the same thing. The dual system theory in this deflationary terminology is not very interesting. It simply collapses into the dual process theory. Recently, however, authors have tended to be more careful about the distinction between the process talk and the system talk. Kahneman was not careful. For him, System 1 was just like a label, the bag in which, the bag whence came type 1 processes, and then System 2 type 2 processes. He was very clear, we're not talking about like separate, distinct biological systems necessarily. And he even said, yeah, that Stanovich came up with System 1 and System 2, but now prefers Type 1 and Type 2, while Kahneman was happy to keep using System 1 and System 2. Recently, however, authors have tended to be more careful about the distinction between the process talk and the system talk, and are often in favor of the former. For example, Keith Stanovich and Maggie Toplak avoid the system talk because it tends to be associated with some unwarranted assumptions, like that the two processes in dual process theory map explicitly to two distinct brain systems, and what is being referred to by the term System 1 or System 2 is a singular system. For Stanovich and Toplak, if the dual system theory comes with... Hold on a second. What did I just do? Did I just move something? No. 1 second. Oh, I gotcha. Okay. So for Stanovich and Toplak, if the dual system theory comes with these assumptions, then it is not defensible. Evans joins Stanovich and Toplak and avoids the system talk because a cognitive or neural system in a well-defined sense should be described with some fairly specific assumptions about its inputs, outputs, and functions. And it has been evident for some time that what people have been calling System 1 is in fact a multitude of automatic systems. These authors avoid the system talk because it implies the implausible idea that there are exactly two cognitive systems in the human brain. This is what Samuels calls the token thesis, according to which each mind contains two particular cognitive mechanisms or systems. Each human mind exhibits a fundamental bipartite division into particular systems. The token thesis is implausible, and the dual process slash system theorists explicitly deny such an idea. For example, according to Stanovich, what is called System 1 is a collection of autonomous systems or mechanisms. The autonomous set of systems, or TAS. TAS. Many of these systems are modular, that is, they are informationally encapsulated and are dedicated to specific tasks. I think all systems are. That's funny. So wild. Feel so alone. Why is everybody always talking about presupposing this conscious agent? Come on, guys. It's the 21st century. Let's fucking go. Again, system 2 is divided into at least two parts. The algorithmic part and the reflective part. And instead of reflexive or algorithmic and reflective, I like reflexive or algorithmic. No, I don't like algorithmic. I like reflexive and recursive. Again, system 2 is divided into at least two parts, the algorithmic part and the reflective part. The distinction between the algorithmic part and the reflective part corresponds to the distinction between cognitive ability and thinking disposition. Cognitive abilities, Cognitive abilities are the measures of the ability of the algorithmic mind to sustain decoupled representations. What? For purposes of inhibition or simulation, while thinking dispositions are the measures of the higher level regulatory states of the reflective mind. But cognitive decoupling was a system 2 thing, a type 2 thing. And now says here, essential type 2 properties are the property of requiring working memory and the property of involving cognitive decoupling, which is the ability to distinguish supposition from belief. And here he says the distinction between, so he says cognitive abilities are the measures of the ability of the algorithmic mind. Remember, it was algorithmic versus reflective. So algorithmic is definitely the mind that's doing the type 1 processes. Cognitive abilities are the measures of the ability of the algorithmic mind to sustain decoupled representations for purposes of inhibition or simulation. So anyway, so I'll just put page 87. All right, moving on. Excuse me. I guess I'll just swallow it, huh? Okay, excellent. Okay, okay, all right. The dual system, we'll get to that. I don't think that's been mentioned yet. The dual system theory is not that plausible if it is understood as the token thesis. I'm sorry, what's the token thesis again? Oh, damn it. Okay. Just because we just haven't. Why is it so implausible that there are these separate biological? Like, I don't necessarily think that either, but I don't see why that's so implausible. I don't get that. I mean, I like kind of get it because it would have to be in two separate skulls to really be able to say there's two different systems. But so long as it's in the same skull, a lot of shit's talking, so it's hard to or impossible to. But still, couldn't you say, yeah, but like by and large, you know, for instance, couldn't it be appropriate to I was thinking about like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, more of system 2, and the ventromedial, more of system 1. Okay, the dual system theory is not that plausible if it is understood as the token thesis. Can there be another interpretation of it? Samuel suggests another, more promising interpretation of the dual system theory, which he calls the type thesis. So then we're just going back to the dual type, right? The dual system theory is not about the number of cognitive mechanisms found in the human mind, but rather about the number of kinds of mechanisms found in the human mind. That is, the claim is not that there are two cognitive mechanisms, rather that there are two kinds of mechanisms. Yeah, that's the claim of the dual process theory. In Samuel's words, each mind is comprised of two types or kinds of cognitive system. Each exhibits a fundamental bipartite division into kinds or types of cognitive system. A similar proposal is to interpret the dual process theory as what Evans calls the two minds hypothesis, according to which there are two minds, both of which include multiple systems. There are forms of cognition which are ancient and shared with other animals, and those that are recently evolved and distinctively human. And each mind can have access to multiple systems in a meaningful sense of that term. This just all seems semantic to me. Two agents? In his book Thinking, Fast and Slow, Kahneman talks about the dual system theory in the following way. Systems in the dual system theory are agents within the mind with their individual personalities, abilities, and limitations. Page 28. It turns out, however, that his descriptions are only useful metaphors. For him, System 2 calculates products. For him, System 2 calculates products is shorthand for mental arithmetic is a voluntary activity that requires effort, should not be performed while making a left turn, and is associated with dilated pupils and accelerated heart rate. This suggests that Kahneman's version of the dual system theory collapses to the dual process theory. Bop, 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 as is everybody else's, bro. But why can't we take the agential talk literally rather than metaphorically? Kahneman argues that the literal interpretation is considered a sin in the professional circles in which I travel because it seems to explain the thoughts and actions of a person by the thoughts and actions of little people inside the person's head. That's actually fine, bro. The problem is when you like take all the most interesting stuff of the mind and put that in a singular little person in the mind surrounded by like automatic mechanisms. But if you take the mind and break it into little people that are like each partial minds. Like this is something that because I hate things that are very near to what he's saying right here, or to what he's saying that Kahneman says, but I don't hate what he's saying that Kahneman said. Against Kahneman, however, one might argue that the dual agent theory is helpful since, for example, No, no, no. Sorry, I got it mixed up. So Kahneman is, but he's not even saying that he's against it. He's just saying that it's a sin in the professional circles in which he travels, and that would explain why he was so clear in his book. Hmm. Anyway, so against people who claim this is a sin, however, one might argue that the dual agent theory is helpful since, for example, it helps us to make sense of why two conflicting beliefs can coexist. Thank you. That's why it theory is helpful. Um, in the Linda experiment, for example, Gold believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is least probable, but at the same time, he also believes that Linda can't just be a bank teller. In other words, he has two conflicting beliefs: the belief that one, the feminist bank teller hypothesis is less probable than the bank teller hypothesis, and the belief that two, the former is more probable than the latter. But this creates a puzzle. Can a person simultaneously adopt two beliefs that obviously conflict with one another? Alfred Melly describes the puzzle as follows: believing two contradictory beliefs simultaneously is not a possible state of mind. The very nature of beliefs precludes one's simultaneously believing that P is true and believing that P is false. So Alfred Melly is a dumbass, bro. And I hope he's never again cited in this book because I really, I like this author. I don't know if I want to say really, but some aspects I really like. And I'm gonna like him less every time he refers, without humiliating, to every time he refers to without humiliating Alfred Melly. That's so dumb. That's aggravating. Alfred Melly describes 86 billion neurons, and you don't think that there can be a network that believes P is true and another network that believes P is false? That's. What do you think, chat? The idea of two subagents explains how conflicting beliefs can coexist. It is certainly puzzling. Okay, great. So that's why you mentioned this, to be like, look at what this dumbass said. This dumbass clearly needs the idea of subagents. It is certainly puzzling that one agent believes two obviously conflicting beliefs simultaneously, but the puzzle is resolved if it turns out that each of the two beliefs is attributed to one of the two subagents. Attributing belief 1 to subagent 1 and belief 2 to subagent 2 is no more puzzling than attributing two distinct beliefs to two distinct agents. Let us call this the conflicting belief argument for the dual agent theory. The conflicting belief argument, or something similar to it, has been expressed in psychology and philosophy. Here are two examples. By the way, I want to talk about something. What I'm doing here is kind of rare, right? To riff, um, and also kind of in a playful way on these topics, right? Most of the time, when you see somebody talking about these things, they, there's a pressure to not contradict themselves, to not say stupid shit, because then they will lose credibility in their academic circles. Um, I am composed of many subagents. A lot of them are really dumb, just like in every mind. That's kind of what I want to showcase. I mean, I'm not like trying to be stupid. I just parts of me really are stupid, and spew nonsense. Um, but like that's okay because you externalize it, you talk it through, and you recognize that different subagents may have produced different sentences, in the same moment. Um, And so this way, I guess it makes it easier to check your ideas. You don't have to feel like any one thing that you said has to be reconciled with another thing that you said, or has to, or represents, you know, the whole speaker. Um, and this is, by the way, because I think that the reason I'm saying this is there's a convergence here. I was thinking about cancel culture yesterday, which I'm not one to normally like complain about, but I will take a moment to complain about one thing because it relates to here. Is that often with cancel culture, one subagent produced a sentence from the to be canceled person, and we're not even allowing for the possibility that a dozen other subagents in that person's mind disagreed with that statement. Now, that said, the person, the to be canceled person, also probably doesn't know that he is composed of many subagents. And so he might feel like he has to commit to what was said. Um, and so those dozen other subagents that object to what he said, to what the other subagent said, kind of get dismissed because the overall system has no understanding that there are these competing subagents. So here are two examples of how the conflicting belief argument or something similar to it has been expressed in psychology and philosophy. Sloman on criterion S. Stephen Sloman in 1996 proposed something similar to the conflicting belief argument, although his commitment to the dual agent theory is not very clear. Attributing two reasoning systems to a single human is warranted if what he calls criterion S is satisfied. And a reasoning task satisfies criterion S if it causes people to simultaneously believe two contradictory responses. According to Sloman, criterion S is satisfied in the Linda experiment. Gold believes that one, the feminist Bank-Teller hypothesis is less probable than the Bank-Teller hypothesis, and that two, the former is more probable than the latter. Next, Davidson on mental partitioning. In defending what he calls the partitioning of the mind, which is somewhat similar to the idea of a dual cognitive agent, Donald Davidson argues that two conflicting beliefs. Oh no, I just remembered talking ChatGPT about Donald Davidson. No, I do not like Donald Davidson. Earlier in this book, I came across something Donald Davidson apparently said. And I was like, huh? I thought I liked Donald Davidson. No, there's like one little thing that he said that I think I did like, but overall, I I reject his ideas. I don't think they hold. I don't even remember what they are though, but I bet I'm going to reject this one. In defending what he calls the partitioning of the mind, maybe not, which is somewhat similar to the idea of a dual cognitive agent, Donald Davidson argues that two conflicting beliefs cannot be attributed to a single agent because doing so makes the mind of the agent unintelligible. Maybe so, maybe I do hate this. It compromises the very practice of explaining and predicting the behavior of the agent by attributing beliefs and desires to the agent. It compromises the very practice of explaining and predicting the behavior of the agent by attributing beliefs and desires to the agent. Thus, two conflicting beliefs need to be attributed to two independent parts of the agent. If parts of the mind are to some degree independent, if parts of the mind are to some degree independent, we can understand how they are able to harbor inconsistencies. The point of partitioning in the mind was to allow inconsistent or conflicting beliefs and desires and feelings to exist in the same mind, while the basic methodology of all interpretation tells us that inconsistency breeds unintelligibility. Um, should we lower the? Can we lower the page a little bit? I mean, like, can you read this? Oh, I can just look right here. Should have. Why didn't? That's so funny. I'm so funny. Oh, you can read that really well. Let's see. Let's see if you can. Which one is this? Okay. Rename. So let's see what happens. Go like this. Okay. And let's make it. What about like this size? Oh, that's very readable, bro. Oh no, I hadn't. Still very readable. What if I go even smaller? Man, that is extremely readable. I'd have to make it so dang big. Or if I go even smaller. How about this? Come on, hurry up. Yeah, it's probably as small as I can go, but alright, that's awesome. Great. Excellent. Sweet. Sweet. Great. Sweet. Okay, excellent. Alright. Um alright, excellent. However, the conflicting belief argument is not very compelling, Donald Davidson. Is that his name? The first problem is that it is not clear why two conflicting beliefs cannot be attributed to a single agent. An agent believing two conflicting beliefs simultaneously would make the agent irrational, but we have already seen several times in this book that humans can be irrational, to at least some extent, in some cases. The attribution of two conflicting beliefs to the same agent is problematic only for someone who embraces a rather idealized conception of agents, where agents need to be rational in the sense of having mutually consistent beliefs. The second problem the second problem of the conflicting belief argument The second problem of the conflicting belief argument concerns the crucial assumption Okay, so the second problem of the conflicting belief argument concerns the crucial assumption in this argument, namely the assumption that there are two conflicting beliefs. Note that this assumption is crucial for the conflicting belief argument, which relies on one agent having two conflicting beliefs. But one of those isn't actually a belief, because it's only the which one is he going to say is the belief? Probably the one that the conjunction is less probable, the one that the rational thing believes. Because otherwise, the heuristic isn't a belief, it's just an association. That's probably what he's going to say. I gotcha. Let's see. I say probably. I mean, I think that that's what he's going to say. The second problem of the conflicting belief argument concerns. Oopsies. I was like, why do I only have one viewer? Alright, there we go. The second problem of the conflicting belief argument concerns the crucial assumption, blah, blah, blah. Note that this assumption is crucial for the conflicting belief argument, which relies on one agent having two conflicting beliefs. E.g., Gold believing that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is less probable and that it is more probable than the bank teller hypothesis. There is no puzzle if the assumption is false. E.g., Gold believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is less probable than the bank teller hypothesis and imagines that the former is more probable than the latter. Does Gold really simultaneously believe that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is less probable and that it is more probable than the bank teller hypothesis? Isn't it more plausible that after learning the correct answer, Gold no longer believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is more probable? He believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is less probable than the bank teller hypothesis. In contrast, it is not clear that Gold also believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the bank teller hypothesis. It is certainly true from his description that he cannot rid himself of the thought that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is very likely to be true, but this thought does not have to be understood as a belief. This possibility is discussed in the next section. Section 3.5, the dual state theory. Okay, so two states. Another idea that tends to be associated with the dual process theory is that type 1 processes and type 2 processes involve two kinds of mental states or attitudes. Let us call this the dual state theory. Psychologists working on people's attitudes have observed that attitudes are typically unstable and that they are likely to change. When people are asked to reflect on the object of their evaluation, suggesting that people have some type 1 attitudes that are largely unconscious and implicit, and some type 2 attitudes that emerge only after reflection is prompted. Only after reflection is prompted. This is a pretty long sentence. Let me do it again. Psychologists working on people's attitudes have observed that attitudes are typically unstable and that they are likely to change when people are asked to reflect on the object of their evaluation, suggesting that people have some type 1 attitudes that are largely unconscious and implicit and some type 2 attitudes that emerge only after reflection is prompted and are conscious and explicit. What is particularly interesting is that the content of type 1 attitudes about an object of evaluation contrasts with the content of type 2 attitudes. For instance, experiments indicate that research participants are likely to shift their commitments when they are asked to give reasons for previously held attitudes, and are more vulnerable to the effects of evidence manipulation when they are asked to give reasons for their attitudes. It looks like, I mean, I know you're watching the recording, but it looks like I'm, oh no, now it says there are 3 people. Because I gotta take a second because, it's a bit personal. I'm just really frustrated. I think there's a part of me that's constantly thinking of ways to get my dad to sort of hear me out, um, to open himself up to and engage with the stuff that I've learned and come up with. See, as I've been reading today, I've been thinking there were just so many things that have popped in my head, some of which I haven't said, um, that have popped in my head about things that I want to understand, and so questions that I have, and also questions that I think that I can answer, or including questions that I think that I can answer, if I'm allowed to just focus on that and work on that. Um, but there's something tugging at me, and that's my dad, tugging at me to not just really not worry about much of anything else, um, and just focus on this. So when I lived in the woods, when I lived in my RV and was focusing on this stuff, we're talking like peak happiness, right? The only thing that could have made it better, well, I wouldn't have wanted that comfort then. I wanted to have those conditions, being in a tent in the woods and so on. So 5 years living outside, excellent. But now the only thing that could beat that would be to be in this kind of setting, to be in an office with electricity, with monitors, with Wi-Fi, where there's with and then with heating, so where I'm not, my fingers aren't too cold to type. And so I guess it would be already, a bit disappointing, maybe a bit hurtful, maybe a bit bad, of him, to say no. I know you were suicidal from 2009 until you were out in the woods, and then like officially felt, and then because when I was out in the woods I felt good about my present, but I still was worried about my future. I still felt like it was an unhappy place, a place where I was gonna have to just worry about getting a 9 to 5 and stuff, and keep track of a bunch of things I'm not interested in keeping track of, and wouldn't be able to or have the time or the energy to keep track of things that I do want to keep track of, things that I do want to do. um, it would be one thing if he like looked at what I've done and so on, and said to me, "Hey, Eris, you know, I don't know, just hey, maybe all of this stuff is wrong, or it's not worthwhile, or I don't believe that you could come up with any more stuff." Um, and tell me, "Hey, so you need to go, you know, I want to encourage you to think about a 401k and your credit score and all this stuff." And if that's growing up, I'm not doing it. By the way, for the record, I think that people who don't think about the mind, I think that minds who don't think about the mind are the children. I think my dad is not doing what he is supposed to be doing. He is a mind that has had issues his whole life. He then passed those issues on to his kids and couldn't help any of them with those issues because he doesn't understand himself, the mind in general, well enough to do that. So I think sticking your head into bullshit like taxes, going and having some stupid, no offense, excuse me, desk job to just pay the bills, to just, have a roof over your head and some food and Wi-Fi and nice shoes and all that. I think that that is like inferior humanity. I think that those people, I'm tempted to say you, need to grow up and realize that there are things that are much more important than having cool clothes on your back or whatever. That in that thinking about that learning about the research about the mind, applying that to your life, trying to be a better and smarter human, making better judgments or withholding judgment when appropriate, whatever, um, is what you need to be doing. So, anyway, while I've been reading, I've been a little bit distracted by some resentment that because of dad's anxiety, which is what I've been realizing finally over the last couple of days, that it kind of explains a lot of things. Anxiety is kind of a unifying theory of a lot of the things that I would complain about my dad. Um, I don't remember how I started that sentence. As I've been reading, I've been growing a little bit resentful that not only is dad not encouraging me to do this, not helping me feel like this is worthwhile or know that this is worthwhile, he won't even look at it. Um, and when I say that out loud, I kind of feel like I'm hearing someone talk about, a not good father that should just be dismissed and cut off. It's hard for me to see my own father that way because, obviously he has a lot of great qualities and mechanisms, um, albeit overshadowed mechanisms. And sometimes you can have a conversation with him and have a connection with him. And so, you know, but I've really loved these last few days sitting here reading this stuff, and I'm really, really looking forward to something that I haven't kind of ever had, or I've never consistently had, or for a long period, which is a routine of just trying to answer the questions that I want to answer and come up with the tools that I want to come up with. Pretty much everything that I've come up with kind of just occurred to me because the questions were like, rattling around. And I would observe things and I would just have thoughts. But really going, let's system to this. Being intentional about trying to answer these questions, I've never really done. Sometimes because I didn't have the right conditions. Having ADHD, there are a lot of like specific conditions that I need. I need somebody else working nearby. I need to have my Adderall. I need to have some food in my system, but not too much, etc. I need to have minimal distractions, etc., etc. And by the way, thank you for being here because you are serving as my body double, as helping me. Because when I feel like I'm alone, I don't get much done. Another reason is confidence. Is that I've gained a lot of confidence regarding my ability to answer these questions in the last few years, thanks to it theory and so on. And I hope to gain more this year because, I'm going to be able to present it to some academics in the fields of psychology and neuroscience. So that's great, and that will definitely help. But anyway, yeah, so as I was thinking about how these conditions are coming into place and how, you know, and it's also living here in this house with my partner, there's not going to be sort of the constant, hey, I need you to go and do this. Hey, I need you to go and do this. Now, sometimes my uncle will be here, and so I'll have to keep an eye on him and so on. But that's not the same because he doesn't really ask anything of you, so it just kind of feels like another thing that you're working on. Oh, hey, I'm gonna go check his underpants. Oh, hey, I'm gonna go wipe. Oh, hey, I'm gonna go change him. Whatever. Um, yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking something kind of crazy right now. one of us is thinking this, and we'll see what the rest of us thinks. Maybe do some shrooms or something tomorrow. Um, and I don't even know if this would make me feel better, but I'm thinking about just kind of going no contact. Well, no, no, no. Sorry, I was thinking about presenting an ultimatum. Either we go no contact because I don't want your influence, and I think that you've been really unfair to not seriously engage with the stuff I've been working on. Because that was like my whole thing. That was the whole. No, let's say there's two big major reasons why I wanted my dad to understand what I've been working on. One, because I thought it would give him a perception of self where he can acknowledge instincts that he doesn't like. Because if he thinks of himself as a singular thing, then it just doesn't compute that he could be producing behaviors, reacting to things in a way that he doesn't agree with. That one subagent is producing this behavior while another subagent has this conflicting value or objective, whatever. The other reason is that I wanted him to know that, I'm not just out here bumming around. That A, I'm doing something with my time, and that B, what I'm doing can be valuable and useful. That can be financially, maybe, whether that be, kind of quote unquote selling the ideas with books or talks or streaming, whatever. Um, and then more importantly, they can be valuable contributions. Even if they're small, a contribution's a contribution. To our species, our understanding of ourselves, how we're gonna move forward, how we're gonna make progress. And from 2022, let's say late 2022, to 2025, I was trying to do that. A, give him an understanding of the mind that would permit him to look at himself with less guilt and less denial, um, less anxiety, less cognitive dissonance. And then two, it was important to me that my father think that how I'm spending my time is justified. And in 3 years, I couldn't do it. Couldn't give him a new concept of self, and couldn't get him to value the way I've been spending my time the last several years, or what I want to do in the future. And when you put it that way, seems like something worth cutting out. And it seems like anybody else or it seems like many people in other people in my position would have cut out much sooner. Still not cutting out. I'm gonna use it as for leverage the fact that I now think that cutting out is justified, cutting contact. And I'm gonna say either you can have some difficult conversations with me that I think will make you feel better, or you can fuck off and I'll fuck off and we'll, have whatever consequences there will be of that. All right. Well, I'm glad I expressed that this was a very significant moment. Um, I think I've been held back by, my commitment to family. I'm still going to be committed to family, just not this member who isn't showing that commitment to me in the way that I want it. He has definitely shown a commitment to me. Been very generous. I'm 35 years old, and I've still gotten financial support from him. But gosh, I mean, there it is again. I feel guilty about that. I really thought back in 2022, 2023 that I would like tell him what I'm working on, and he'd go, "Oh, damn. Well, I can't take it with me." I mean, not that he like has money, but he gets checks. So he has a source of income. And I really thought that, yeah, back in 2023. So in 2023, I'm living in the woods, so I don't have, and I don't have a source of income. Um, I didn't want to be supported by them. I just was gonna go to like food banks, and well, that's what I did, and I volunteered, handing out food to people, and then would take some of that food. Um, but they insisted on supporting me. They would like send me money, and he just felt such a strong obligation to support me. He never accepted that I was really okay not having, money. And of course, well, I had to pay for cigarettes and hash and alcohol somehow, so, you know, it was a hard thing to insist no on, you know? But I literally threw their credit cards that I had in case of emergencies, which I was using because I had no source of income. I threw them in the fire. Uh, yeah, but they just were never really able to respect my parents have always been very generous, very caring. But I want him to be generous with sort of his time, his energy, his cognition. Um, yeah. So anyway, no worries though. Um, so I'm gonna write him a letter. Maybe I'll do that in like what, maybe February. Oh, his birthday's in February. Okay, so March. All right. So let me just write this down. So January, we are reading Philosophy of Psychology. We are reading. Uh, so how do I want to put this? Let's call it Sassy Academics. So we're getting ready for our meeting with Schachtman by reading Philosophy of Psychology and Self, and Garfield by reading Losing Ourselves. February, all we do is edit. Video editing. We have so much to catch up on. And then March, Frank, which is an acronym for Francis reluctantly accepts neuroscience knowledge. But it can also be an acronym for Francis refuses all nice kindness. Because he's an angry, he's a yeller. And And he's just kind of intolerant, can't really receive things. What did I say? Francis refuses all niceness. Let's say, and knowledge. Okay, you don't want to know what I've learned. You don't want to know what I've come up with. You don't want me to help you. You want me to be nice and help you with your anxiety and or knowledge about the brain or ability to speak French. Okay, you're refusing to be nice enough to sit down, do what you need to do to engage with what I'm saying. Okay, so it's either Francis refuses all niceness and knowledge, or Francis reluctantly accepts neuroscience knowledge and his fucking son and his son's abilities and raison d'être. So write a letter, try to come up with strategies. While we're writing the letter, we're also coming up with strategies that we're trying, and if none of that works, we give him the letter. Okay, great. Excellent. Let me just put the date on these. Can you tell I'm sad? Picturing it. Alright, so we're gonna get back to it. Alright, let's go. Oh, not us. You're right. I haven't fed you guys. Let's see. So we have. Oh, I thought it went up to like 111. Oh, great. Oh, not. Oh my God! I thought a door just opened. Okay. Oh, great. So we only have like 6, 7 pages, and then we'll go for a walk, boys. All right, hold on. Okay. So, all right, let's just start over this section. So we're looking at the dual state theory. Two states. Another idea that tends to be associated with the dual process theory is that type 1 processes and type 2 processes involve two kinds of mental states or attitudes. So let us call this the dual state theory. Psychologists working on people's attitudes have observed that attitudes are typically unstable and that they are likely to change when people are asked to reflect on the object of their evaluation, suggesting that people have some type 1 attitudes that are largely unconscious and implicit, and some type 2 attitudes that emerge only after reflection is prompted and are conscious and explicit. What is particularly interesting is that the content of type 1 attitudes about an object of evaluation contrasts with the content of type 2 attitudes, For instance, experiments indicate that research participants are likely to shift their commitments when they are asked to give reasons for previously held attitudes, and are more vulnerable to the effects of evidence manipulation when they are asked to give reasons for their attitudes. And they are more vulnerable to the effects of evidence manipulation. Oh, here is one example from the dual attitude literature. Couples who have been dating for a few months. Oh yeah, yeah. Great. Okay, I will let him explain. Here is one example from the dual attitude literature. Couples who have been dating for a few months are asked to provide reasons why they are attracted to their partner, and are then asked to rate their commitment to the relationship and the likelihood that they will live together or get married in the future. Participants' responses are elicited via questioning. Guided by the formulation of the question, some couples are invited to offer intrinsic reasons for being together. I date X because ... whereas others are invited to offer extrinsic and more instrumental reasons. I date X in order to ... Research participants invited to give extrinsic, so intrinsic reasons versus extrinsic reasons. Research participants who are invited to give extrinsic reasons ended up rating their attitudes toward their partners more negatively and tended not to predict living together or getting married in the future. They did not seem to realize that their reports were biased by the way in which the questioning was conducted, by what activity that slapped. Well, yeah, if you're running that activity thinking about, oh, I'm dating them in order to blah, 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 and then you check in, hey, so how long am I going to be with this person? Oh, well, I don't really like them that much. And also, once I get this thing, I'm not going to. Research participants, so they did not seem to realize that their reports were biased by the way in which the questioning was conducted. The fact that they provided reasons for their attitudes does not guarantee that they reported an attitude that accurately represented their attitude, how they felt, and what they thought about the relationship. Timothy Wilson and Dolores Kraft designed a similar study on attitudes towards one's partner, but without evidence manipulation. Participants, maybe this is the one I thought they were going to talk about because that wasn't it. Participants were asked to report their attitude towards their relationship. They were then divided in two groups and were asked first to report their attitude towards their relationship again, and second, to predict the future of their relationship. In one group, they were asked to list reasons for the success or failure of their relationship before making the prediction. So they've already said their attitude, and then in this one group, they say their attitude again, and then they have to list reasons for the success or failure of their relationship, and then they predict whether it will succeed or fail. Results show that participants who were asked for reasons for the state of their relationship experienced a shift between their initial attitude toward the relationship and then their prediction about the relationship. All right, I'm just going to tell you what I thought they were talking about. If you say, if you ask one group of participants, list 3 reasons why you love the partner that you love, and you ask another group to list 10 reasons for why they love the partner that they love, well, it's not very easy to think of 10 reasons, no matter how much you love someone, to sort of think up, verbalize things that are great about them, that you think you feel love for. And so let's suppose that all participants equally loved their subjects. I mean, their lovers. So in the first group, they had to write 3 reasons. That's easy. I can come up with 3 reasons. Beautiful, smart, funny. Done. The other group had to come up with 10 reasons. Okay, yeah, she's beautiful, she's smart, she's funny, she's financially stable, she loves adventure, she loves animals. Um, and as they started to struggle, that struggle was consulted by another part of them that was like, supposed to evaluate the relationship. And so that subagent goes, hey, it looks like we're really struggling to come up with the reasons. We must not love them very much, actually. And so then those subjects at the end, after they list, when they have to like report, on a scale of 1 to 10 how much they love their partner or something, that group who had to list 10 reasons, even if on average they came up with 6 reasons, even if they came up with more reasons than the other group who came up with 3 reasons, the group that had to list 10 reasons and maybe came up with 7 or whatever typically reported a lower level of, on average reported a lower level of love than the first group. So that's what I thought they were going to talk about. I don't know if that's an attitude thing. I don't know. So I don't know if he didn't count it because it's not relevant, or I don't know. Okay. So psychological models attempt to explain the instability of attitudes when people are asked to provide reasons for them. One model appeals to retrieval mechanisms and the idea that attitudes towards an object or person are constructed mainly on the basis of those aspects of the object or person to be evaluated that are easily accessible when the relevant information is retrieved. So we're talking about an availability heuristic. By looking for reasons for a previously reported attitude, people justify their attitude based on the most accessible reasons for having the attitude, for having that attitude. These reasons might be different from what actually caused the initial attitude, and then may also give rise to a different attitude. This is the important sentence. Gotcha. Jaideep Sengupta and Gavin Fitzsimmons give up the idea that people have persistent attitudes independent of context and say that attitudes are freshly computed based on available contextual cues. That means that attitudes are fleeting, being formed from scratch every time they are elicited. A new search for reasons may cause participants to form an entirely new attitude towards their relationship. Initially, participants may report an attitude that reflects how they feel about their relationship at that time, maybe an attitude formed via a type 1 process. The attitude reported after a search for reasons may be affected by the weighing of benefits and costs, maybe an attitude formed via a type 2 process, that weighing of benefits and costs. It is not surprising that different processes give rise to different attitudes, and then different attitudes give rise to different processes. This explains the effects of evidence manipulation that participants experience in the dating couples study. Non-doxastic dual state theory. First of all, I'm going to look up the word doxastic. The term doxastic is derived from the ancient Greek word doxa, meaning belief. Thus, doxastic attitudes include beliefs and other psychological attitudes which resemble beliefs. All right. Oh, excuse me. Which window am I trying to go back to? Oh, here. All right, so these are non-belief or attitudes that resemble beliefs, dual state theory. It is tempting to think that the dual process theory implies the dual state theory. Type 1 processes and type 2 processes, I wasn't tempted to think that. I wonder why it's tempting. Type 1 processes and type 2 processes give rise to two kinds of mental states. Uriah Kriegel nicely expresses this idea. Wherever there is a duality of processes, there is likely also a duality of products. And the associationist system likely produces one mental state, the rationalist system, another. Okay, so the associationist system likely produces one mental state, the rationalist system another. If you say so. Actually, no, that doesn't really sing. Doesn't. I don't know. Again, it is tempting to think that the dual state theory is implied by the dual system theory. Okay, so the previous one was that the dual process theory implies the dual state theory. This is that the dual system theory implies the dual state theory. Keith Frankish writes that dual system theorists typically assume that the two reasoning systems have separate databases, and it is attractive to link the two types of belief we have distinguished with the two systems. Keith Frankish writes that dual system theorists typically assume that the two reasoning systems have separate databases, and it is attractive to link the two types of belief we have distinguished with the two systems. I'm not sure I understand this, but I'm too hungry. Dogs are gotta be hungry. Let us consider this proposal in relation to Gould's response uh, to the Linda experiment. Gould has a mental state, M1, about the feminist bank teller hypothesis being less probable than the bank teller hypothesis. He also has a mental state of a distinct kind, M2, about the feminist bank teller hypothesis being more probable than the bank teller hypothesis. There are various versions of the dual state theory with different accounts of what M1 and M2 actually are. We can roughly distinguish doxastic dual state theory from non-doxastic dual state theory. According to the former, both M1 and M2 are broadly doxastic states. Doxastic means related to beliefs. E.g., M1 and M2 are different kinds of beliefs. According to the latter, at least one of them is not doxastic, which is something that he had said earlier. E.g., M1 is a belief and M2 is a non-doxastic state or event. Okay, well, here's what Gendler says on A-leafs and B-leafs. Atheist, agnostic. What do you want to do? A-leafs or... Yeah, let's do A-leafs and B-leafs. Let us start with Tamar Gendler's non-doxastic dual state proposal. Gendler explicitly justifies her proposal, the A-leaf, B-leaf distinction, based on the heuristics and biases program and the dual process theory. On her view, M1 is belief, and M2 is what she calls an A-leaf. Gould believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is less probable than the bank teller hypothesis, while she A-leaves that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the bank teller hypothesis. Okay, and I'm guessing A-leaf just means like when you sort of are working a proposition, are entertaining a proposition, have in mind a proposition without subscribing to it. Oh no! Oh no, that's not true. But why does it say landscape portrait? Why does it say portrait? I wonder what it looks like on Twitch. I really gotta log into Twitch. Okay, Okay, so Gendler introduces the concepts of A-leaves with some examples. One example involves an experience of the Grand Canyon skywalk. A man, let us call him Wilhelm, is convinced that the solid clear glass floor of the Grand Canyon skywalk is safe. But when he is actually on it, he suddenly feels extreme fear and becomes unable to move. In this case, Wilhelm believes that the skywalk is perfectly safe, otherwise he would not have stepped on it in the first place. Nonetheless, according to Gendler, Wilhelm believes that the skywalk is dangerous, which explains his affective and behavioral responses. Gendler's general characterization of an A-leaf is as follows. A paradigmatic A-leaf, no, a paradigmatic A-leaf is a mental state with associatively linked content that is representational, affective, and behavioral. And that is activated consciously or non consciously by features of the subject's internal or ambient environment. A leaves may be either occurrent or dispositional. Still don't know if my guess about what a leaf means is right or not. A paradigmatic a leaf is a mental state with associatively linked content that is representational, affective, and behavioral, and that is activated by features of the subject's internal or ambient environment. All right. Couldn't explain what that means, but no alarms are going off. But again, still don't know. Okay, this characterization suggests that an A leaf is a composite mental state that is constituted by the following components. One, a representational component, e.g., really high up and a long way down. Two, an affective component, e.g., not a safe place to be. And three, a behavioral component, e.g., get off. I'm just gonna continue to. I'm just gonna think that my guess about what a leaf means is right. However, understanding a leafs in this way makes Gendler's proposal problematic. A leafs are presented as composite entities that are constituted by representational, affective, and behavioral components. But why is it that the representational, affective, and behavioral components constitute a composite state? Why can't we simply explain cases like the Skywalk case in terms of representational, affective, and behavioral processes without positing a composite state that is constituted by them? Introducing a composite state seems to be explanatorily redundant. God damn. This is the only time I've ever heard of Gendler. No, that's not true. But just the first time they're introduced, and it's just like, yeah, you're contributing nothing. In some cases, I really like the idea. Oh, but okay. I don't know. I can't. I got. I want to. I'm gonna review this. Hmm. In some places, Gendler hints at a different, less problematic characterization of A-leaves. To have an A-leaf is to have an innate or habitual propensity to respond to an apparent stimulus in a particular way. These remarks suggest another understanding of A-leaves. An A-leaf is understood not as a composite mental state, these remarks suggest another understanding of A-leaves. An A-leaf is understood not as a composite mental state, but that is constituted by representational, affective, and behavioral components, but rather as a propensity or disposition to go through a series of cognitive, affective, and behavioral processes that are statistically but not always correlated. To say that Wilhelm, in the Skywalk case, believes that the Skywalk is leaves that the Skywalk is dangerous is to say that he is disposed to go through some particular cognitive, e.g., thinking about the idea of falling down, affective, e.g., fear, and behavioral, e.g., unable to move processes for a disposition. Okay. I like Gendler's attitudes. Gendler's A leaves and B leaves. All right. 4 more pages. Doxastic dual state theory. Alright, I know, boys. Frankish on type 1 and type 2 beliefs. Keith Frankish proposes a doxastic dual state theory according to which what we commonly call belief may actually be two or more different types of mental states with distinct features. Type 1 beliefs and type 2 beliefs. On this view, M1, which was that the that the conjunct is more likely. Yeah, that the fact that the idea that Linda might be a bank teller is less likely than that she's a feminist bank teller. Okay, so M1 is the like system 2 belief, right? So on his view, M1 is a type 2 belief, and M2 that it's actually more likely that she's a feminist bank teller than that she's a bank teller is a type 1 belief. That's great. Love that. Gold type 2 believes Gold type 2 believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is less probable than the bank teller hypothesis, while he type 1 believes that the feminist bank teller hypothesis is more probable than the bank teller hypothesis. A key feature of beliefs is consciousness. Nope. Nope. Disagree. A key feature of beliefs is consciousness. We might think of beliefs as conscious states, but some beliefs are actually never actively thought about, and they remain in the background. So then, how do you say a key feature of beliefs is consciousness, colon, some beliefs are actually never actively thought about and they remain in the background? What? Frankish's example is that we have many beliefs about how a tap works, but we rarely think about these beliefs or express them out loud. I don't think I have beliefs about how a tap works. Nah, bro, I don't know it. I don't get that. Another key feature is control. We tend, and we're wrong, we tend to think of beliefs as mental states that we decide to adopt. Ugh, ugh, ugh. But many beliefs are formed automatically as a result of subpersonal mechanisms. Oh! Consider the following example. People may glance out of the window and pick up an umbrella on their way out of the house. The best explanation for their action is that they believe that it is raining or that it will be raining soon. However, they have never decided to believe that it is raining or that it will be raining soon. They have not weighed up the reasons for and against the claim that it is raining. Okay. There are some other relevant features of belief that Frankish considers, but simply by reflecting on consciousness and control, it is easy to see that beliefs come in two types. Those that are conscious and are typically the outcome of deliberation, and those that are unconscious and automatic. Oh boy. Frankish calls the former type 1 beliefs and the latter type 2 beliefs, aligning them with the dual system theory, where type 1 beliefs are understood as outputs of system 1 and type 2 beliefs are understood as outputs of system 2. Type 1 beliefs work like behavioral dispositions, which are reflected in nonverbal behavior but are not explicitly stated or challenged. Type 2 beliefs work like opinions, which are reflected in verbal behavior but do not necessarily impact on people's actions. When they do, it happens via the causal relationship between type 1 and type 2 beliefs. Frankish argues that the notion of type 2 belief captures what in the philosophical literature has been known as an acceptance, almost like a policy to which agents explicitly commit. A useful example here is that of implicit racial bias. Many people have a type 2 belief that all humans are equal, independent of their skin color. That's their explicit policy. However, those people might also behave in ways that suggest that they have racist type 1 beliefs, e.g., non-conscious and non-controlled associations between black people and violence. Schwitzgebel on in-between beliefs. We would like to mention Eric Schwitzgebel's proposal. Although it is not strictly speaking a dual state theory, it is relevant to our discussion. It could be described as a multiple state theory since it recognizes beliefs, non-beliefs, and attitudes in between belief and non-belief. Schwitzgeber suggests that it would be helpful to consider some mental states as neither beliefs nor non-beliefs. He calls them in-between cases. Like a surgeon does with his wife. No, I shouldn't have done that. Like a lawyer does with his wife. No, like a judge does with his wife. No, like a judge does with her husband. He calls them in-between cases. Schwitzgeber discusses the example of Antonio, who is sometimes disposed to believe that there is a benevolent deity and is sometimes disposed to believe that God is just a beautiful metaphor. How Antonio feels about God and what he thinks about God changes depending on the context. On a beautiful spring day, Antonio may be disposed to believe in God, but at a dull church social event, he may not. According to Schwitzgeber, there are numerous cases of in-between believing, and a dispositional account of belief can handle those cases. In-between cases of believing are cases where a mental state has some, but not all, of the dispositional properties of a belief. And it's all these. Okay. Great. God bless. In between cases of believing, and it seems like so much of the errors or the weeds that we create for ourselves in psychology and philosophy is that we're trying to is that we want reality to be as clean as our representations of it. I just think that so much stuff that we've read today, and I'm not going to really justify this, is undermined by the fact that, first of all, reality is kind of inconceivable to a human mind, or to any biological anything. And secondly, that words are not things. That words point at things. And what they're pointing at is going to kind of vary. Remember when we were talking about the semantics of the discussion about states versus processes and how it was the system versus processes, and how the dual system theory was kind of, that he was saying, collapsing in a dual process, and it was just different words for the same thing. Right, so he said that at one point, and I was saying that at one point. Okay. All right, in between cases of believing are cases where a mental state has some, but not all, of the dispositional properties of belief. So the reason I just made the comments that I made was because, it's never going to be that clean where there are belief cases and they always have the dispositional properties that all beliefs always have. That's not real. That's not going to be real. So when we introduce in-between cases, it's like we're assuming that there are true beliefs that are very consistently have the properties that we want to attribute, but it's so much looser than that. I mean, reality is. The best we can do is come up with representations that are generally useful, accurate, reflect, that help us, do in reality. But they're not going to perfectly capture reality. So we don't have to keep discussing, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't perfectly capture reality. So now we need to introduce in-between cases. You can have beliefs and non-beliefs, and you can acknowledge that some things kind of fit into both. You don't need a whole nother category. That's what I don't know. Anyway, so, but back to what Schwitzgebel says. So, in between cases of believing are cases where a mental state has some but not all of the dispositional properties of a belief. One dispositional property of a belief is that if you have a belief, then you are disposed to behave in a way that manifests your commitment to the truth of the content of your belief. Here's an example from Schwitzgebel, where a person asserts something that sounds like a belief but does not have the right dispositional properties. Dayu's belief that most pearls are white has entirely atypical effects. It does not cause her to say anything like, most pearls are white, which she would deny. She'd say instead that most pearls are black, or to think to herself in inner speech that most pearls are white. She would not feel surprised were she to see a translucent purple pearl. If a friend were to say to Dayu that she was looking for white jewelry to accompany a dress, Dayu would not at all be inclined to recommend a pearl necklace. Nor is she disposed to infer from her belief that most pearls are white, that there is a type of precious object used in jewelry that is white. So, like, no evidence that she believes that pearls are white. For Dayu's mental state to be a belief, it needs to have the dispositional properties of a belief. When a mental state fails to have the dispositional properties of a belief, such as when Dayu does not infer from her mental state with the content most pearls are white that a precious object used in jewelry is white, then we cannot call that mental state a belief. But we also apparently are not going to be able to call it a non-belief. Let's see why not. Depending on how many of the dispositional properties of a belief Dayu's mental state has, it could be an in-between case or something else altogether. Wait, you haven't even why isn't it a non-belief, bro? Why not non-belief? It is therefore conceivable. Therefore, my ass. It is therefore conceivable that mental states resulting from System 1 fail to have the dispositional profile of well-behaved beliefs because they are not used in inference or are not explicitly endorsed. I don't know about this, bro. It is also conceivable that mental states resulting from System 2 fail to have the dispositional profile of well-behaved beliefs because they do not drive behavior. You say so, bro. All right, last page and the summary. Oh, and then we're going to do the questions. Well, we're just going to read them out loud. We haven't really been doing any of them. The three proposals above, so Gendler's B-leaf, A-leaf distinction, Frankish's type 1, type 2 distinction, and Schwitzgebel's in-between cases of believing, which was not at all explained. Tell me I'm wrong. Explain it to me. Contribute to a better understanding of the complexity of human mental lives and help us acknowledge how heterogeneous human mental states can be. Great. It is worth noticing, though, that each of these views seems to rely quite heavily on the over-idealized concept of agency that we challenged earlier. Yeah, that too, bro. That too, bro. Over-idealize a lot of things were relied on, a lot of over-idealized things. And yeah, agency too. I think so, right? Did I also have that experience? Gendler's proposal is supposed to answer puzzle cases such as the Skywalk case. Why is it that Wilhelm in the Skywalk case, why is it that the Wilhelm in the Skywalk case why is it that Wilhelm in the Skywalk case feels extreme fear and becomes unable to move despite his belief that the Skywalk is perfectly safe? This is puzzling given the assumption that Wilhelm's feelings and behavior are always coherent with what he believes. But why should we accept this assumption? Isn't this an over-idealized assumption about human agency? Great job, MIYAZONO-san. Again, the idea that Antonio cannot really believe that God exists given his often conflicting thoughts and emotions, that's so funny. So, this Bible comment here, no way you've been watching the whole time. So, did, because that's the first time God was mentioned. I'm thinking, did Twitch, no, YouTube, I guess, heard God and was like, oh, people like this. And you know what's so funny? Gosh, if football be edits is watching it, excuse me. What's so funny is, so I'm really like looking forward to when there's like engagement where I'm able to sort of answer questions, or even I can ask questions, and the chat and I were all just working together to understand and use, you know, what happens in the channel and the information and blah blah blah. So yesterday I'm streaming, right? I'm talking about some really interesting stuff. And again, don't want to discourage any engagement, but I hope it's okay that I share how some of those hopes just felt dashed by someone going, "Do you believe in God?" What? Do you understand like how low level that is compared to what we're doing here? And it's happened before. You know, yeah, that someone like put a comment and it was like, "Damn. Am I is there again, really I don't want to even discourage like if you don't see how that's like low level, absolutely fine, absolutely fine. I just hope it's okay to express that. And if you do understand that, you can appreciate that. Anyway, so again, the idea that Antonio cannot really believe that God exists, given his often conflicting thoughts and emotions concerning God, is grounded in the idea that for Antonio to have that belief, his behavior would have to be more coherent. Similarly, consider Sylvia, who systematically prefers to sit next to a white person rather than a black person on the bus. See Chapter 6 for a more thorough discussion of such cases. The idea that she cannot type 1 believe that black people are equal to white people, but maybe only type 2 believe it, is grounded in the idea that for Sylvia to type 1 believe that black people are equal to white people, her behavior would always have to match her type 1 belief. And that's also too simple because no, there are one-its or type 1 processes that can be consulting one belief, and then other one-its, other type 1 processes that can be consulting other beliefs. It's much messier than, yeah, anyway. The idea that she cannot type 1 believe that the idea that she cannot type 1 believe that black people are equal to white people, but maybe only type 2 believe it, is grounded in the idea that for Sylvia to type 1, so she must not, based on the evidence that she, sits next to white people much more often than black people. But maybe she can at least type 2 believe it, and that's grounded in the idea that for Sylvia to type 1 believe it, well, we would see it in her behavior. I don't know about this always, though. But otherwise, yeah, bro. Antonio and Sylvia are unlikely to be as consistent in their thoughts and actions as we would like them to be, which does not necessarily tell us anything deep about the metaphysics of belief, but may simply be a byproduct of their and our inescapable irrationality. Nailed it. Finally, summary. The basic idea of the dual process theory of reasoning is plausible. The theory's empirical plausibility comes from its consistency with a variety of empirical studies, including the study of reasoning biases. The theory's theoretical plausibility relies on the fact that it enables us to solve the rationality paradox as well as the self-defeating rationality paradox. However, there are a number of issues with the theory. In particular, there is no agreement on how type 1 processes and type 2 processes should be characterized, really just how they should be named. Nor is there agreement on how type 1 processes and type 2 processes interact. Those aren't problems. we don't have a way of looking at type 1 and type 2 mechanisms, just their results. But as technology improves, as our understanding of the biology of reasoning and thinking improves, not a problem. So, and in fact, that's your in particular. There's a number of issues with the theory, and that's your in particular. No, the only issue with the theory, actually, what I'm about to say is very similar to this. But the difference is, I'm not claiming there are other issues. The only issue is that it can't be really experimented, can't really be tested yet. So I'm basically saying the same thing as you. I just disagree about the number of issues. Um, and actually, you know what? I'm going to say the same thing to myself that I said to you. That's not an issue. That's just the normal evolution of learning, of knowledge, of discovery. Okay. Point number 3 out of 4 of the summary. We're so close. The dual process theory is often associated with the dual system theory, but it is not a trivial task to find the interpretation of system according to which the dual system theory is plausible. It should not be interpreted as the token thesis, the idea that there are exactly two systems in the brain. Perhaps it should rather be interpreted as the type thesis, the idea that there are two kinds of systems in the brain. 4. The dual process theory is also associated with the dual state theory. Frankish proposes a doxastic dual state theory that distinguishes type 1 beliefs from type 2 beliefs. Gendler, in contrast, proposes a non-doxastic dual state theory that distinguishes A leaves from B leaves. These attempts to distinguish between different types of states are promising and insightful, but tend to assume that agents' behavior is rational. So what do we think? We're going to do the questions now and then we're done. But what do we think about him not at all in a philosophy of psychology book, an introduction, not at all like just doing some mic drop statements while like trying to address all the bullshit soul talk of Plato, like all the shit that philosophers got wrong in the past that people currently believe today, because those philosophers were just working on intuitions that are also in our genes, such as that there's this immaterial thing, that it's like this reason system and this emotional system, such as that there's this conscious agent, this conscious decider, that there's control and deliberation, all that stuff. What do we think about the fact that he didn't ever, I don't think any of that, maybe mentioned some of it, didn't treat it in his duality chapter in his book, Philosophy of Psychology and Introduction? I don't know. It's kind of like cool, leave that shit in the past, but it's also kind of like that shit's not in the past. I wish it was. I get people in my chat talking about God, asking me if I believe in God, saying to me, I haven't even read this yet. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave us his only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Jesus loves y'all, and he's returning soon. Repent and God bless. Because I guess, what, we're just a bunch of atheist philosophers in the chat. Okay, questions. 1. Which cognitive task in your everyday life are most likely to be due to... That's a question for a sassy, for an interview, for one of my street interviews. Go up to people, hey, explain type system 1, system 2 processes, type 1, type 2 processes, and ask, hey, would you say that you use more of type 1 or type 2 processes in your daily life? And you know what would be great is that I should say explicitly, type 1 processes are kind of defined as being the default process, the constantly running, constantly giving results processes, and then type 2 are like the lazier processes that, only come in sometimes, or something like that. Now, how often, like what percentage of the day would you say that type 1 processes are, that your cognition is constituted mostly by type 1 processes, or some understandable way of asking that question on the street? and watch how many people are going to say, oh, yeah, for me, mostly type 2 processes. But yeah, I definitely know some people. Well, first of all, I guarantee you, most of the people are going to say, oh, for me, mostly type 2 processes. Second of all, I bet I want to include in my bet, separate money amounts. That a lot of them are going to say, yeah, but I definitely know some people that are really type 1 thinkers. Shut the fuck up. I know that you're a type 1 thinker if you say that to me. One, because I just saw you do a substitution, right? Well, I don't know that you did a substitution, but that's the only explanation I have for why, when I told you that type 2 processes are rare, and then asked you how often they happen with you, and you said that they weren't rare, even though you didn't know what they were until I defined them as being these rare things. Um, do I stand by what I'm saying? I'm not sure. I'm gonna continue. Um, but you substituted not with, oh, what do I actually do, because you don't really know which processes are which. These are new concepts to you, but which one you should do, or which one is more consistent with your self-image. You know, that would be okay. Type 2 processes. That's what I want to be doing. That's what I think a good person would be doing, or whatever. You know, a good citizen would be doing. I'm gonna write that down. That's good. I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about that. I'm gonna do that at the open mic. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do that at the open mic. I'm gonna say I just have one question for you. I'm gonna ask them, and then what I've been thinking about doing in an open mic is just going off. I don't know if I'm gonna be in the state to do it, but just going off, just like, you motherfuckers. All the things that you think about and all the things that you think you are, and you never think about what you are. You motherfuckers. You fucking poser. You're so full of shit, and you are what is wrong with the world. Um, Question number two. What are the implications of the fragmentation of the mind, and in particular, of the distinction between what are the implications of the fragmentation of the mind, and in particular of the distinction between type 1 and type 2 processes or systems for the prospects of improving the quality of human reasoning via education and training? My answer, just knowing about the fragmentation is going to help enormously. And then secondly, that knowing that type 1 processes aren't super reliable but are constantly going is going to help give type 2 a reason to stop just defending the type 1 processes, but the current schema that type 2 has of what it is and what the mind is in general warrants justifying, rationalizing the type 1 processes. Number three, if you have a type 1 attitude and a type 2 attitude, this can be about racial differences, religious affiliation, or your romantic partner. Which one is your real attitude? Ugh. And there you go. So 3.5 hours to read like 30 pages. Page 104. Not even 30 pages, 26 pages, 3.5 hours. So 216 minutes for 26 pages. Um, bro, that's like 8 minutes a page, bro. My mouse has gone to sleep. It's 8.3 minutes a page. That is not a tenable reading pace. But maybe it's okay. Ooh, I got 6 likes, bro. I actually feel my heart just floated up a little bit. Holy smokes. 6 likes. And then if I give myself a like here, 7 likes. God damn, bro. Damn. So what is that? What kind of a button does that give me? Is that just silver? Does that give me a? Is that? Am I gonna get a gold YouTube play button? Let's look it up. How many? What do you need for a gold YouTube play button? Requirements for gold YouTube play button. Okay, so is it 7 likes? It's not about likes. Let me see how many subscribers. I just got 8. Thank you. So I'm guessing it's Mother, who's this other person watching. Thank you, Mother. Let's see how many followers. So you have to have 1 million subscribers. Okay, drum roll, please. Drum roll, please. 263. Not bad, bro. No, literally, because I had 262 when I started this stream. Woo, woo. That's pretty exciting, huh? Awesome. All right, so let's leave it at that. Hey.